You're watching Medfield TV, community shows.
All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Board of Selectmen meeting for Tuesday, March 12th, 2019. As always, this meeting is being video recorded, so conduct yourselves appropriately. We'll begin by taking a moment of appreciation for our troops serving in the Middle East and around the world. Thank you. I also wanted to note this is obviously our first meeting since the passing of Michael Sullivan, and there will be a lot of discussions in town, over the next several months about how to properly recognize him and permanently memorialize his contribution to the town. I did want to note that, and also thank Christine and Roberta Lynch and the rest of the town staff for all the work they did to help Mike's family with the arrangements and the funeral and memorial. So thank you to Christine and everyone. For those of you who were here for the Vine Lake Cemetery fee discussion and Medfield transfer station sticker fee discussion, we told Mo that he can skip that for tonight. So I'll give everyone a minute to leave, and then we can get on to everything else. So we good? All right. All right, so we're going to start with the Police Chief Search Committee update, and just a couple of things on how we're going to proceed with this, as I know a lot of people are going to want to be heard about this, and everyone's going to get a chance to be heard about this. We're going to hear from the committee first. We'll begin with that, with their presentation, the candidates, the recommendations, and the rest of it. There'll be any questions that come from the Board of Selectmen, any discussion with us, and then we will take questions from the public. And I'm going to ask three things. First, make sure you have a microphone when you're going to speak, and so the people at home can hear and it can be recorded. Secondly, just identify yourself and where you live before you comment. And then third, I think if we could focus tonight's discussion on questions for the committee, process questions, questions for us, pretty much anything in that territory is fair game. I am going to ask that you refrain as much as possible from questions about the particulars of the candidates beyond what the committee has presented, things you may have Googled, things you may have learned online in the last 24 or 48 hours. I think in respect to them, I would like to hear from them first before we get into a discussion on the merits. A discussion on their merits is not on the agenda for tonight. That's on the agenda for tomorrow night. And so obviously there's going to be some wiggle room on that, but I would prefer this not to turn into a debate on that before they've even arrived. Other than that, I think everyone will have a chance to speak. I realize that a lot of people are here to speak on behalf of a candidate who is not one of the finalists who's been put on the agenda for an interview tomorrow night, Deputy Chief and Acting Chief Wilhelmy. You'll have an opportunity to do that. I want the opportunity for every position that people have to be stated. Not every position has to be stated by everybody. So I would suggest that tonight will go more smoothly. If someone has made the point that you intend to make, you may not need to make that point again. And again, we're going to try to give as much time as we can. I want to finish this piece of the agenda by 9:30. So that should give us almost 2.5 hours of discussion on this topic. We will come back tomorrow night for the interviews. The way the interviews are going to work, as we did in the past with the fire chief, the Board of Selectmen will ask questions of the candidates. To the extent you have questions you would like asked, you can submit them via Evelyn Clark, eclark@medfield.net. That's Clark ending with an E. There will also be paper tomorrow night. If you want to write down a question, hand it to members of the board. Each of us will look at the questions and decide whether we want to ask the question. And so that's how the interviews will proceed tomorrow night. Once the interviews are done, then there will be a discussion per the agenda tomorrow night on the rest of the process and on the candidates. And so those are the ground rules for tonight and for tomorrow. And again, I expect to take public comment again tomorrow night after the conclusion of the interviews. So we'll begin with the Police Chief Search Committee, and I want to thank all the members of this committee who have put in a lot of hours on this since they were appointed last summer. And they've taken a lot of time, they've volunteered, they've done a lot of work. And I'm going to ask Bob Conlon, the chairman of the committee, to come forward, and Mel Seabolt. And Bob, if you could introduce the other members of your committee who are here today.
My name is Bob Conlon. I'm at 5 Richard Road here in Medfield. I want to introduce the rest of the committee members. Rachel Brown is a citizen at large, and she's a municipal compensation consultant. Paul Godens is a citizen at large. He's a security consultant. And Paul is in the hospital, and we just want him to know that our prayers are with him and hoping that he's feeling better. Jason Redzuk was part of the committee as a citizen at large. He's a database engineer. Russ O'Neill was part of the committee, a citizen at large. He's a member of the Brookline Police Department. Mel Siebold, part of the committee, elected Park and Recreation member and retired police officer of Brookline. Chief Carrico, our fire chief. Mo Galay, DPW director. And Dr. Marsden, our superintendent of schools. What I'm going to do is really just focus in on the process that we've been doing for the last 7 months. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there, and my purpose tonight is just to put information out in terms of the discipline that we did to arrive to where we are now. On June 26, 2018, the Board of Selectmen unanimously voted to appoint the members that I just mentioned to the Police Chief's Search Committee. What we did was that we put an RFP out, and we utilized the services of BadgeQuest. BadgeQuest is a public safety consulting firm that specializes in public safety selection processes. BadgeQuest assisted the town in the 2005 police search chief meeting, and most recently in the fire chief search. BadgeQuest is a Massachusetts firm founded in 2001, and the current president owner is a former police chief, Bob Pomeroy. The town elected to have BadgeQuest provide recruitment, candidate screening, assessment center, and background investigation of final candidates. Through information that went out to the townwide survey and the police department survey, the committee evaluated the candidates on a minimum education, experience, and qualifications. The quality the committee identified that it was seeking the next chief included community-oriented, budgeting experience, communication skills, including social media, technology, data focus, collective bargaining experience, staff development expertise, and leadership skills. Parallel to that experience, the committee, along with Pomeroy's help at BadgeQuest, we worked on a job description, and we posted that out starting in September 2018. What BadgeQuest holds us responsible for is they basically put you through 4 steps in this kind of selection process. There's a job posting, there's a questionnaire, there's interviews with the committee, and then there's an assessment center. So I'm going to walk you through each one of those components. So as I mentioned, the job advertised September 2018, over 50 resumes were received. Exact number is 57. Again, candidates were evaluated based on the minimum qualifications, including years of command, budgeting, collective bargaining, as well as educational attainment. We also reviewed the cover letter for communication skills. Out of the 57 resumes, 17 candidates moved to Step 2. Step 2 is a questionnaire. There are 9 topics and questions identified by the committee and BadgeQuest. Out of the 17, we had 14 responses. 2 individuals withdrew. 1 chose not to respond. 9 candidates were invited to interview with the committee. In terms of the interviews with the committee, all 9 candidates accepted and were interviewed over 2 nights. Same questions were asked to each candidate, and 30 minutes were allotted for questions. After each candidate and before the next one, we met briefly to do a debrief after each interview, so we captured right in the moment how that interview went. At the conclusion of each night, the candidates were ranked. The committee took a cumulative approach and voted to move 5 candidates to the assessment center. So at the end of 2 nights, we went through, we took our scores, talked about all the 9 candidates, and we decided to move 5. For those of you who don't know, an assessment center, as described by Chief Pomeroy of BadgeQuest, an assessment center is a process to test and evaluate leadership, administrative, and management skills. The candidates are put through a series of written and role-playing exercises and are evaluated on their performance in each exercise using predetermined criteria. So for this particular assessment center, it was comprised of 5 exercises designed to evaluate each candidate's leadership, communication, problem analysis, decision-making, principles, teamwork, and planning and organizational skills. 5 exercise, for example, is a role play where, as police chief, you're meeting a Boston Globe reporter about to break a story about an officer from a neighboring town involved with what looks like a DUI accident, hits a fence. One of your officers comes to the scene and lets the officer from the other town go. No record of an accident. What would you do? We're going to run it in the Globe tomorrow, so on and so forth. So that was one of the exercises. We also had a rapid-fire question on situations that come up with the police department. So we had 3 current and/or former police chiefs that are independent assessors that are part of this process, and they're the ones that are asking the questions in these role plays and in this rapid-fire exercise, and it's on a variety of topics, including sexual harassment, stealing, seeing a coworker steal, things of that nature. Another exercise was each candidate was given up to 10 to 12 minutes to how they would address the department on their first day and what they would say. And so we had that one as well. And then another exercise was that there's a terrorist situation in one of our schools. What do you do in terms of resources, letting people know, so on and so forth. So that is a very stressful exercise, and it's right in the moment. We, as committee members, we're silent partners or observers. We don't interface with these individuals. We don't have any say. We're just there looking at, how they perform. After the end of each exercise, we met as a group and evaluated each candidate at that time. So again, it was in the moment. Our fifth step is where we are, which is the recommendations to the Board of Selectmen. So throughout these four processes, and I think I just want to emphasize it again, we have a job posting, resume, cover letter for communication skills, we have a questionnaire, we have interviews with the committee, same questions over 2 nights, we just did it by alphabet, and then the assessment center with those 5 exercises, 3 independent assessors, and then Pomeroy is like the host. He runs the whole thing. He doesn't have a vote or anything like that. It's up to those 3 individuals to assess. So the committee was tasked with conducting a process that would identify the best overall candidate for chief of the police department. Each member of the committee has participated fully and has his or her voice heard by the other members. The committee would like to thank both the Board of Selectmen and the residents of Medfield for their patience throughout this process. The committee unanimously submits the following 2 candidates in alphabetical order to the Medfield Board of Selectmen for consideration as the next police chief in Medfield, Michelle Garrett and Brian Pichnarsik.
Thank you, Bob. Bob, can you just describe, I know there are parts of the process that, there's going to be questions for you all tonight and us, but there are parts of the process that are confidential and participants were promised confidentiality. Can you describe what parts of those fall into that category?
Sure.
Thank you.
So the results of the assessment center are confidential,
And the questionnaires as well? Some
and
of the,
the questionnaires as well.
anything else?
I think that is it.
All right.
As you can imagine, if anyone who's ever interviewed before, if you've gone out for interviews, the confidentiality is extremely important because you don't want your company, manager, whatever, to know that you're interviewing. So until people are notified that they're moving on, the whole confidentiality piece is critical.
Right. And you conducted surveys of the public and of the Medfield Police Department?
Yes.
And those are confidential as well, at least as the police department surveys?
Yes.
Okay. Pete, questions?
So you mentioned that your goal was to provide the best overall candidates, and so that the 2 candidates that you're putting forward, you're saying to the selectmen are the 2 best candidates that you saw.
These 2 candidates throughout each step distance themselves from anybody else. Yes.
And in terms of when you say through the process, through these steps, can you just maybe remind me of what those steps were where you interacted with them? It was a written submission from them. It
Sure.
was the assessment center
So
interviews.
Right. So the first one is job posting that people would send their resume to. Right. So being a director of HR for more years than I want to admit,
You've seen some resumes.
I've seen some resumes. I don't put a lot of effort on that because this isn't what people normally do. But myself personally and the committee was more interested in the cover letters because that's a communication piece I think is very important. So that was step 1. Step 2 is questionnaires, questions that went out again so we haven't met them at this point. Questions related to, I can give you a couple of examples. So these are questionnaires that they had to respond. Again, writing communications, and can they get their point in terms of being articulated in a short period of time. Let me just see. Just have it. When I came to Medfield 50 years ago, I didn't need glasses.
So the first one says, please provide a very brief description of your current department and community.
Yeah, that would be one. Identify specific skills, abilities, and experience that will aid you in becoming a successful chief of police in our town. Why do you believe you would be the right candidate? What's your experience in creating or administrating a budget? Your application will be held in confidence at this time. However, if you're selected as a semifinalist, your police chief or supervisor will be contacted. What do you anticipate that he or she will say about your character, ability, and work ethic? Then we ask whether or not the police chief or supervisor that they're working for knows that they're applying. Residency, if you were selected as next chief of police, where would you reside? And whether or not they had applied for other positions. So we start to put it together in terms of resume experience, first opportunity to look at communication skills, and then specific questions where, again, it's really about the written communication skills.
Yeah. And then the interviews came after that?
And then the interviews came after that.
And then the assessment center?
And then the assessment center.
All right, so you had those touches, those contacts with each candidate.
Yeah. And the interview was the first time that we actually met the candidates.
Yeah.
I can give you some examples of the questions of the interviews if you want. All the questions were
The same
the
for
same.
every
Describe
candidate.
some of the critical problems and challenges facing police departments today, particularly in towns of our size. What do you see as some of the answers? Modern police forces should have experience with science and data-driven analysis when deciding on policy and procedures, policing policy. What's your experience with data? Nationwide and here in Massachusetts, tactical teams are choosing not to respond for call-outs involving suicidal subjects. Given this, what tools and/or resources do you plan to provide officers to safely resolve these situations? Question about budget, public relations program, experience working with the combined dispatching center, pedestrian safety, and what's the appropriate role and responsibility of local police departments in keeping school students and staff safe? So those are questions that are asked to every candidate.
Okay. And after you've gone through all of these steps, how well do you and the members of your committee feel that you got to know all the candidates, the final candidates, I guess?
I think that's a great question. I think throughout any interview process, there's always the opening. You know, I walk the person in, there's some small talk. They may say one or two things to kind of break the ice. None of the questions were really driven to who they are outside the four walls of the interview room. So I think from the point of view of the data collection related to their answers, what their experience has been, we got to know them pretty well. What they do outside, you know, when they're not working, wasn't really our charge. You know, we try to keep it as focused as possible on these items, at least for the interview.
Yeah. You just reminded me that the first time that I met Jeff Marsden was in this room, and it was a luncheon, and it was really more of a social thing than an interview, a formal interview. But I was sitting down where Mark is, and he was sitting here, and he got up and came over and sat with me, and so I remember that. That was a very smart thing for him to have done.
Sure.
Can I sit on the other side of Pete next week?
So I guess, how did you decide to come up with just two candidates instead of more? Because that's sort of a big question.
Sure. So we talked about this for a pretty long time.
I bet.
I think when we go back to these 4 steps, we go back to our notes in terms of evaluating after each step. Michelle and Brian, the gap was fairly significant. I know that sounds simple, but that's what came out. Throughout each step, they started to distance themselves.
So there was a clear distance between those two candidates that you're presenting to us and the rest of the candidates, is what you're
Correct.
saying? Yeah, okay. Is this, a lot of this seems subjective to me. The assessment center especially, maybe seems very subjective to me. I've never seen the assessment center, I've just read about it, but does it feel like it's easy to number and rate, or is it a lot more subjective?
I'm not in that business, so it seemed to me that there's a methodology and a discipline to, in fact, evaluate the different role playings, the communication piece related to addressing the department, first day and all those things. I think any interview is subjective, right? It's how you perceive the candidate. I think when you have 3 people in that situation or 8 people on a committee all coming up, with same answers, to me the subjectivity starts to decrease significantly.
Oh, okay.
I don't, Pomeroy's probably a better expert than I am. They strive very hard to keep it objective. I've never seen their scoring system. Like I said, we're silent observers, but there's a whole methodology. They sit where you guys are. He has a individual who captures notes after each exercise. We're not privy to what that is at that time.
Yeah.
And it seemed to move pretty quick in terms of their own scoring system.
And did your committee, you and your committee, tend to agree with the scoring that the assessors gave them?
I think we had some difference of opinion in terms of how we felt some people perform, but it was fairly close. I don't think it was someone getting a 40 and someone getting a 90.
Yeah. I guess those are the only questions that come to my mind at the moment. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Yes?
Maybe let's start with a comment, because have been in that, or part of my business, my companies have been in that business. Actually, an assessment center is intended to be a more objective way of assessing someone by creating a realistic scenario, rather than picking, who looks good or who talks well, to actually get to some real work-related scenarios. And the idea is, this is what you're trying to simulate real life, and you're saying, okay, how do you deal with that? So it's actually intended to be a more objective. I don't know whether BadQuest is good at it, but that's what it's intended to do. When I read the report on the scoring, they had effectively three experts that were scoring that didn't know the candidates. And if you look at the write-up, you can tell they created a scenario. The expert said, in this scenario, here's the 12 or 15 things that someone should deal with. Let's see if they get dealt with. And they almost checked off. They qualitatively assessed them, but they were looking for a certain set of things, and they commented on things they left out.
Right.
So I'm not sure how well they did it, but in terms of the issue of objectivity, that at least is the theory behind an assessment center, is it causes you to take a more objective look at who you're choosing, for what that's worth. I had 2 micro questions and one strategic question I don't know if you're going to be able to answer. One of the questions, the cover letter was used to evaluate communication skills. Did the candidates know that their cover letter was going to be evaluated?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So it was not like a blind test. They knew it was coming. Okay.
Yeah. Just on that point, Gus, I think anytime someone applies for a job, cover letter or resume, that's fair game.
Well, I agree with you. It's just, I was curious whether, sometimes people go, here's my resume, and it's one paragraph, and if you're using a criteria to evaluate it, they could throw them, they could just not, they could do a brief cover letter either because they were in a hurry or because they didn't want to waste your time, and then they find out that they're being evaluated on the quality of the prose that they used. Second question, there were a couple people that dropped out. So you eliminated, we had a lot of people respond. You eliminated a good number of them, and then there were a couple of people that dropped out. This is a 2-part question. One, I'm curious whether any of the people that dropped out were at that point in the process seen as strong candidates. And then, is there anything about the process that we used or anything about what we were doing that drove good candidates away, or is it just that making them go through this drill, actually you do separate the ones that aren't serious? Sure,
it's a great question. In terms of, I don't know what the reason was at the questionnaire. 2 people withdrew and 1 chose not to respond. I don't think there was a lot of follow-up at that point. We haven't met the individual. Other individuals during the interview, somehow they either had shared with their police department that they were now taking an interview, and within a week's time or less, they were promoted. So I think part of it is leverage. Those individuals, we were not going to move on.
Good. Okay. And now I have one strategic question. I'm not sure it's even a fair question, or you're going to be able to answer it, and anybody that wants to take a crack at it, it's great. When you have a decision like this that you're trying to make,
Yes.
if you were, after you've made it, you look back at the decision, it usually works out that there's a limited number of factors. In retrospect, you can say, well, we went through this multi-stage process, we did all these detailed evaluations, but if I really step back and looked at why we decided what we decided, usually you can distill that down to 3 to 5 core key factors that were really the drivers of the decision. Maybe somebody scored better in one than another, but you can almost distill down what the qualities were that actually framed the decision. Are you able to do that in this case?
I'll give it a try. I'm obviously not prepared, but I'll tell you my own gut. The two candidates that we are sending forward for recommendation, there's a connection. So during the interview piece, as Brian and/or Michelle were talking, the way they can tell their story, if you will, the way they can connect their experiences with the questions flowed. It was smooth, and it made for a very good interview in terms of engagement. I think that was a big one. I think the way they prepared on the fly, on the assessment center on certain scenarios, because my hat's off to all the candidates that went through that. That is meant to be stressful, and I was stressed, and I had no dog in the hunt here. They were able to, again, I think under very extreme conditions, get across. So that in the moment decision making for me came across. Those are the two that come to my mind.
So I want to probe a little bit.
Yeah, please.
What you didn't say there is evaluating their experience itself. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but I want to test.
Sure.
I assume you actually did look at experience, and that did weigh as a factor, even if it wasn't an assessment center exercise kind of thing.
Oh, yes, absolutely. That's how they got into the interview. And the
So something
questionnaire.
like experience was kind of a gate. So I'm just trying to understand the thought process. Getting these final stages of this process, there were certain things they had to demonstrate, one being perhaps experience. I realize I'm pushing you down a path.
No. So their experience is actually I'm probably not saying it right. The experience of what they've accomplished up to this point is what I'm saying. I think that experience is what they drew on in terms of the interview and how they did at certain parts of the assessment center. We didn't. It was 10 years of progressive mobility. So if somebody was starting their career 4 or 5 years and submitted a resume, we never looked at that because their experience wasn't strong enough.
Then I guess one last piece. Again, I'm pushing you, so I apologize for doing that.
Sure.
There are several things in here that will give you insight into how good people are at communicating. There's things that will tell you how good they are at analyzing overall. For me, this is just me. It's a question of, is this a person a strategic thinker or a tactical thinker? That's how I distilled it down. And there's another quality that says, can I picture this person on the ground in the department dealing with the people, and do they have the personal qualities, which are going to be integrity, going to be confidence, going to be fairness. How did that get factored in to saying not only are these folks good at speaking, not only do they have good stuff on paper, but I can actually see them walking into this department and running it well?
Sure. So for Brian and Michelle, for example, the assessment center, part of their speech in addressing the department the first day was a lot of information related to respect for what's been done, respect for the job that people are doing, understanding it's not easy if they are selected to be an outsider and come in, and really, appreciating that fact. These 4 steps and the number of hours that we've spent over the 7 months, it starts to shape, quite honestly.
And the last question is in your report, so I'm just confirming, this was a unanimous vote of the committee.
Yes, it is.
Just a couple of questions, and no ranking between the two of them? Just 2 equal recommendations?
Yeah.
Okay. Just on proof of process, I mean, this is the process we've used twice before, and I think from my perspective successfully in terms of the hires that came out of it. But can you comment at all on why you think this process as conducted is likely to yield the best candidate?
This process?
Yeah, the one that we just employed.
Because of the variety of steps, it's not perfect in terms of, I think the 4 steps are very helpful. I think any good process, you reevaluate at the end of that process. I would repeat, but I would probably do some things possibly out of the assessment center, incorporate that into a longer interview. I think 30 minutes was 30 minutes for some people was less, and some people was long. And I think there's some situations from the assessment center that you could probably maybe migrate into a different form on the interview piece.
And in terms of research outside of the information that was provided by the candidates, I mean, what did the committee or MedQuest do to get information elsewhere from sources other than the candidates themselves?
So as far as I know, we didn't do anything related to that. BadgeQuest talked to, when appropriate, immediate supervisors or whatnot. They have their own network, as you can imagine. Pomeroy's been around for a pretty long time period. I think you can interview in a back alley at 3 o'clock in the morning and think nobody knows you're interviewing. They do. And you can always network and find out. So I think they had some kind of informal information to present these candidates to us as we started to move forward without tarnishing the process.
But did they, where the supervisors knew, I suppose, they could speak to their supervisors, but what about the candidates' colleagues or subordinates or people they supervised?
Because of the confidentiality, I don't think I'm sure they didn't talk to them.
Right. Did you ever ask the candidates if they would allow that?
Well, they were asked on the question, does your supervisor know, but we'd never talked about peers.
Okay. So there was no kind of, as far as you know, in what BadgeQuest provided to you, there was no kind of diligence on their colleagues or anything like that?
Yeah, right, correct, as far as I know.
And
Is that like, you're talking about reference checks and things like that?
reference checks.
Can the committee get information about references? Or
So the individuals presented to us, Pomeroy had information related to them in terms of whatever his network is, but like any process at the end, whoever the successful candidate is, it's a full-blown references need to be walked through. Peers, town administrators, whatever their reporting structure is, north, south, and east, west.
But that hasn't happened yet?
No, it has not.
Okay. And did you get, from whatever that network is that BadgeQuest had, I mean, did you get a kind of a recommendation from them? Did you get a summary of what kind of the word on the street is about the candidates or any kind of thing like that?
No. I think that the best they did with, these are good, they don't want to tarnish it and we don't want to be influenced. And so I think as you start to have Pomeroy set up things and whatnot, he may make an offhanded comment and that these are good individuals. That's the extent of it. The real thorough investigation is at the end.
That's after the interviews. Correct. And after we make an offer.
Right. Now, that's not to say if we felt like we needed to do something beforehand or information, we certainly could do that with their permission.
Mm-hmm. Right. But you didn't ask if you could do kind of a more thorough vetting of information other than what they provided?
Correct.
All right. And did you ask them in the process, did you ask any of the candidates specifics about things that they had done in particular, right? Obviously, they're in the public eye and the positions they've had for a long time, and I'm sure everybody has been Googling them and their names and whatnot. I mean, did you ask them anything about matters that had come up in their towns, matters that came up in their departments, things they had handled specifically?
Only if it was part of the formal interview.
Okay.
Just on the references, Mike, what I would say, having been in this business a long time period, is that you got to really dig to find a negative reference, right? That's somebody fired twice or whatever, just once, right? You hope that there is candor and honesty on the other end, but I have an agency at my company that is a retired police chief who goes out and digs and gets that information because the first 5 or 6 names that they give are their peers or their buddies or whatever it may be. And the other thing is asking for the written assessment in Massachusetts employment law. You can, if someone's been evaluated, you can ask for his or her performance appraisals for the last couple of years, and they should be able to give that. And that's really gold.
But did you get that? I mean, these candidates are not from Massachusetts. Did you get that from them?
But Connecticut has a similar role.
Okay. So you got all of that from them?
No, we didn't.
Oh, you
But that would be part. That,
Oh.
So what you're asking is, what we've done in the past is we've done that at the higher stage.
Mm-hmm.
So from a process standpoint, if we made a decision on who to offer, it would be contingent on those, the reference
Correct.
checks would be for that person.
Correct.
If they came back surprisingly negative, then we'd reverse our decision.
Correct. Everything is pending a successful background check.
And one last question, and I'll apologize for too much of a preamble on it, but if I could just summarize. What it sounds like to me then, in terms of evaluating the experience and the background, that was what got people through the door. But that once they were through the door, you evaluated them primarily on the various steps in the process that you undertook.
I think that's fair.
All right. So, I mean, that the scores that you have, the recommendations that you have are based on the people who made the cut based on experience. It's how they perform in these tasks. You didn't go back at the end and then combine the assessment, the interview, and the rest of it with the overall package.
We did. I mean, if you look at each step, there's an evaluation. At the end, you take those 4 steps and look at the resume and the experience and decide whether or not that's a good match or not for Medfield, and that's where we came out.
Okay. All right. That's all that I have from Christine. We're through this, so I imagine you don't have any questions.
No, Bob's.
All right. Anything else, Bob, Mel?
Mr.
Jason?
Chair, could I just ask a couple more, 3 questions?
All right, 3.
Did Mr. Pomeroy make a recommendation?
No.
There was one of the candidates who went through the assessment center that left. Do we know, you know why he left? Or withdrew, I thought?
Promotion.
Yeah, promotion.
Oh. And then the last question had to do with the difference of experience between the 2 candidates that you're bringing forward to us, because it seemed to me that one had a substantial amount more experience in terms of command and that sort of thing than the other. Did you evaluate that difference at all?
Yes, different experiences in terms of what both Brian and Michelle, they obviously are different.
But they're both sufficient in your mind to be able to be our chief, clearly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. All right, thank you.
All right. So, to the extent people
Thank you,
have,
sir.
of course, questions, or unless we have anything to discuss before we open up for comments at all? I don't think so.
No.
Okay. Anyone who'd like to has questions, comments, what have you? Again, 2 requests. Please use a microphone. You can either come up to the lectern, or Mayor Colleen Sullivan has the portable mic. You can wrestle it from her if you want to ask a question.
Anyone?
Unless you were looking to ask the first question, Colleen.
No, I'm.
Okay.
I will pass the mic.
Okay. Right behind you there, Mr. Hinckley. Oh, right over here.
Thank you. Jack Rose, been in Medfield probably 40 years, and most know that's not even close to being a townie. Seen a lot of changes over the years. The process is amazing, but it also seems very analytical, and sometimes you need that. But the size of the town questions whether you need that much analytical approach. Was there any credit or any positives given to a candidate who might know the staff, might know the weaknesses, the strengths, the heartbeat of the town, that kind of thing? This is Medfield, and I'm not belittling the town, I'm not belittling the job at all. It's the most difficult job a police officer or a chief that you'll have in town. Was any credit given to, and you know the candidate I'm talking about, someone who knows the heartbeat of the town, knows the staff, knows the personnel, knows the ins and outs, when to push, when not to push, that kind of thing?
Yes. To be completely honest, absolutely. It's hard to ignore what John Wilhelmy has done overall and as interim chief. But tonight, I can't go into any kind of details, but yes, we certainly consider that.
Paul?
Paul Hinckley. Actually, I've been in town all my life, all 75 years of it. I've gone through a lot of these police chief interviews all the way from Chief Man to Kingsbury, both Kingsburys, and all of them, even McGuire. Now, all the rest of them, they've gone through the system like you, through the academy, looking for the best and all that. But it always came back to the experience in Medfield. Now, we've got a man here that's been here for 40 years. Now, if he wasn't qualified, I'm sure 4 chiefs would have got rid of him by now, instead of promoting him up to assistant chief and taking over the town for the last year to be in charge of it. I think a lot has to do with common sense. Now, I've been a supervisor at General Motors. I'm one at the Housing Authority now. And I know when you go out for a recommendation to somebody else, they can't tell you good or bad, because if they don't get the job because of what you said, they could be sued. And I know that's happened a lot. So GM, as big as they are, they will not recommend anybody. But I know this man's been on for 40 years, so he knows the heart of the town. You got to have common sense. I've seen people, police chiefs in different towns come in, and they got no common sense at all. They came from a big city, and they think they can browbeat and arrest everybody, bring in the attack dogs and the whole 9 yards. I mean, and I think it's demoralizing not even to put him on the interview list with the selectmen for being here, because I've seen before with the last couple of chiefs who went through the committee, that police, that, and they were trying to pinpoint somebody coming here from another town. And if we had done that, the last chief probably wouldn't have been here, because you people had good sense, overrode it, and you brought in the best, too. And sometimes college education isn't the best thing. Some people can be smart with paperwork and dumb with common sense. They have none. I had a kid with spoke 8 languages. And the person told me, send him up to the thing at the Atlantic Brick. Have him weed the garden for the owner. I said, okay. Brought him up. 8 languages he could speak. Man, he had a brain he could talk about almost anything. But you know what? I told him to weed. He says, well, which ones are the plants? I said, okay, forget it. Cut the lawn. He walked over, looked at the lawnmower, and I'm watching him. He's standing there looking at it. And then I walked over. I said, what seems to be the problem? He says, where's the key? Naturally, it had a rope back 30 years ago. But the kid was a genius. No common sense. You got to have the heart of the town, know the area of the town. Know the area of the town. I'm part Italian, I guess. I talk with my hands. But I think it's demoralizing to the department by not even giving the man an interview. I mean, we usually, very seldom do we go outside of town, except when we hired the administrator, who was trained for 18 years under Mike, or 20, whatever it was, and she's very qualified, so we didn't even bother going looking. And here, now you got a man for 40 years, and he's been acting chief for the last year, and been on the force for the acting under the chief for the last one for his whole time. And you're not even thinking he's got qualifications. I know some people just don't get the full story of a guy. Some can talk good, some can. I've got kids coming down to my place to shovel. They never saw a shovel before. It's like, if they can't do it on the computer or on the telephone, they're not doing it. My kid's an electrician for Griffin Electric. He's got electricians come And he has to tell him, put the phone away. If you're not talking to me, then put it away. But they got no common sense. He told a kid to, one of the licensed electrician, he said, go wire all the plugs in that room.
Can we give a few more people a chance? You wanna wrap
Okay,
up?
you know what
Yeah.
the kid did? He wired them, but he forgot to hook the wires to the plugs.
Thank you. Mr. Hani?
First of all, Bob, I would thank you for the work you put in on this. I know it's been a long run for all of the people on the committee. And I'm absolutely confident that you have the same interests of the town as we have, who don't quite see it the way it's being played out. You know, I certainly endorse what Paul Hinckley said about Chief Wilhelmy and what was earlier said about the nature of the town. And it seemed to me, as you went through that, you and the committee apparently, and that committee was retained, or the consultant was retained by the town, correct?
Yes,
Yeah, and stayed with you through the whole process?
yes.
Yeah. And the consultant came up with 2 people from out of state. Did they suggest other people from out of state?
So we had 57 resumes. There were other people that were out of state that did not make the
There
cut.
were. Okay.
They didn't come up with those individuals. It was a job posting that people applied to. They weren't actively recruited.
Okay. Well, there's a number of concerns here. One is, as Paul said, that Chief Wilhelmy, whom I've known, I've been in town since we're putting out lineage here, 55 years, right? And I've served where these gentlemen are now sitting for 6 of those years, and I served on the school committee before that. I feel I know the town. I've stayed interested, and I really think that ignoring the contribution that Chief Wilhelmy has made to the town and putting the emphasis on really a textbook suggestion as to how this should be conducted, that's what I took from a lot of what you said, and I understand that. I've worked in big corporations. I've been a general manager within Raytheon, okay? So I know I've hired hundreds of people. You really have to look at the town in its present situation. It's going through change after change after change of personnel in key spots. 3 of them were on your committee, okay? Newly hired. Jeff Marsden, maybe 6 years now, but the others really quite new. I doubt that they know this town the way that John Wilhelmy knows it. And that should have been, I think, looked at closely. What Paul said about discouraging the troops, I once asked John Carmichael to stay here as a policeman. He was a policeman in town. He's now chief in Walpole, okay? He left because there was no opportunity here. How are these young, new people on the police force going to feel to see John Wilhelmy treated this way? It's really distressing. And I wish you, as the board here, would reconsider. I urge you to enlarge that interview to include John, and I'd ask you to give the town a period of time to digest this whole thing and not come in tomorrow night, hear it, and then vote. We have, just since January, there have been 8 sessions that you've had, all of them in complete darkness as far as the town is concerned. All right, they're all, and I understand executive session for reasons that you deduced, but that doesn't inform the town. You know, we're the ones who have to live with the police department in town, and the leadership of that department is critical. So, again, you know, don't want to monopolize the floor, but this is a really important decision. You know, I stand behind Mrs. Mann, Billy was a great chief in this town, but he wouldn't have, I don't know how well he would have done on that, what you just went through. but he sure would have done well in any small town. These people are a nominee here coming out of Providence, 200,000 population. What do we have, 14? Right? And it's just not consistent at this point of time with what Medfield needs. And you can see the concern behind me here. So if you do this, I tell you, it's a mistake. If you rush into this, and if you don't give John Wilhelmi at least the same, and not just fit him in, but actually listen to him and consider what's involved here. You know, we have so much change going on. You have so much before you that this is one burden you need not put on us. Thanks for the time.
Thank you, John.
So Bill Massaro, 36 Evergreen Way. I don't know John really well. I certainly knew Bob Meany, a lot more. But I want to make just a comment about my impression of how the Board of Selectmen had been operating. So you all know I've been here, sitting in this back row here for, 9 years now? It seems to me that you generally have placed a value on continuity, on experience in the town. You've just recently made a selection for a high town official under those same kinds of guidelines. I would ask you to consider trying to maintain at least an effort to get continuity in this particular instance, and I think you should add another candidate to the list. That's my comment.
Thanks, Lars. Hi, good evening. My name's Kevin McClay. I live in town. Some of you may know me, may not. I'm a former police officer here, and when I heard, some people were coming tonight, I was honored to be here. I've worked for John at the time for 3 years. I have moved on for some reasons that had been spoken about here, that at the time there was little opportunity. I moved on, currently a Boston police officer, and going from the town of Medfield, I went to town of Norwood and now in Boston, you see that, as you spoke of and some people have said, the analytical part of it is fine, and it's an important part of it, but it's just a part. I think that, with all due respect, the one thing that was missed was the intangibles. If I had a candidate or two, it sounds like, from out of state, and I was interviewing them, and I'm not questioning what BadgeQuest did at all, but if I said to them, right now, at the high school, there's a school shooting. Do you know how to get to the high school? Does that person know how to get to the high school? I mean, I think there's a lot that's missed. I question things like that. This isn't a big city. I work in a big city. Things are different. The policing is different. I had to be accustomed to that. I've worked for John. I know some of these people that still work for John, and I would be very upset with myself if I didn't come here and at least express that. I know I don't want to repeat what people have said. I think people get the point. My one question is, and you mentioned, and sir, I think you mentioned it earlier, that BadgeQuest was used for the process with Chief Meany. Is that correct?
Yes.
The question that I have is, was Chief Meany the choice of BadgeQuest, or was Chief Meany put in above the choice of BadgeQuest? If anybody knows.
I was on the committee in 2005. BadgeQuest doesn't make the recommendations. The committee makes the recommendations. So the committee makes the recommendations for those that go to the assessment center.
Okay.
And then the committee votes the candidates to go to the Board of Selectmen.
I'm just curious if that was similar process, if Chief Meany was the one that was pushed forward, or if it was outside of their recommendations.
No, the committee put forth Chief Meany back in 2005.
Okay. Thank you for your time.
My name's Joe Brienzi. On behalf of the Medfield Police League, we decided a little bit of information is kind of needed to address some of the issues going forward with the selection of an outside candidate for the position of Chief of Police. Many of you are aware, laws in Massachusetts are really complex. So when you go with an outside candidate who doesn't live in Massachusetts or who doesn't work in Massachusetts, they never had or they have minimal experience with Massachusetts laws. They don't understand how our court system works, as well as the personnel assigned to it. They don't know how the district attorney works, as well as their personnel, including directly with the Norfolk County District Attorney, Michael Morrissey. They don't know how collective bargaining works, the agreements, and the process that happens with that. Chief Wilhelmy already has these relationships. He has them with area chiefs and outside agencies. Chief knows how civil service works, the MPTC Academy, and the dispatching requirements. Knows how the Massachusetts firearms laws work and Massachusetts use of force policy. He's already dealt with personnel issues in a positive manner with leadership skills. He's dedicated his entire life to learning the ins and outs of Medfield and built long-lasting relationships in this town with many of its 12,000 residents. He'll become an employee 40 years this June. He's been under a performance review assessment with no blemishes at a high caliber and exemplary service, and yet a 6-hour assessment center is going to tarnish that record. He's built connections with the residents, business owners, employees of Medfield. He has infinite knowledge of the town, its residents, as well as law enforcement knowledge to run the department with the highest of respect and morale. He's dealt with personnel issues in a positive manner with leadership skills. We already spoke about this earlier. We just lost someone 44 years to this town. He's given 40 years to this town, and we're about to lose him because of a 6-hour assessment. The Medfield Police League is comprised of 21 police officers and dispatchers, with 52% of the force under 5 years on. How do you explain it to more than half of your department that tenure does not matter in this consideration? A 6.5-hour assessment has an incredible bearing on your standing. However, there's minimal consideration for the 40 years dedicated to one town, Medfield. Thank you for allowing me to speak on behalf of the Medfield Police League.
Thank you.
So I just want to make sure the assessment center is not the sole decision-making. It is a piece of the process, number one. Number two, BadgeQuest has nothing to do with putting final candidates in front of the committee. This is all about, the committee makes these decisions. The assessment is a piece of it, and you see some very interesting things there, but it's a 4-step process.
But you put a lot of pressure on him.
Or just,
Yeah.
you need the microphone.
I think we killed it.
Already? Yeah, Mark, do you want to lend your, I know you're eager to speak on this, Mark, but if you
I have
wanna
nothing
lend-
to say for once. For once.
We just want to wonder kind of how can you rate somebody who was required by the town to put forth a budget to the town, run a department on a daily basis, and yet we have outside candidates, one who's a lieutenant, and I understand she has responsibilities, but she's not running the day-to-day operations of a department, as well as a deputy chief who has a chief above him. Also, that takes pressure off his plate so he can focus on this opportunity. But yet, John Wilhelmy, there was no one above him to take this load off his plate. So I want to know how that was considered, basically, into all of this rating and why he wasn't put as the third candidate.
Sure. So Michelle is now a captain, just for the record. She's been promoted. Again, it's. I don't want to appear that I'm avoiding the question. It's just really hard to get into specifics, and I can't. We spent 7 months and an awful lot of time together, and quite honestly, a lot of time off hours in terms of looking at each resume, each candidate, how they're performing, so on and so forth. So that, having done this a long time in terms of the private sector, there is no one model for a job. There are very, different variations for a teller, for operations manager, or whatever. And you've got to go through a process and make the best decision that you can, and that's what we did.
Other questions or comments? Yes, sir.
Robert Flaherty, I've been a police officer here in Medfield since 1987, almost 32 years. And I would just say to the board respectfully, there's no experience, there's no teacher like experience. There's no textbook, there's no interview like experience. John Mahoney has that experience. Medfield is not Providence, Rhode Island. We don't have any strip joints, we don't have Buddy Cianci. There's a regular town that has regular people, hardworking people. John Mahoney should be at least considered to be in the running. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry to make everyone move around here, and usually the battery lasts longer than that, but.
Sorry, I'm not good at this, but I'll speak for my family. I'm Rosemary Mann, and my dad, as you know, was police chief here. He was the epitome of small-town chief, and John worked under him and trained under him, and as far as I know, most people liked the work that my dad did. And this community sounds like they're looking for a small-town chief, and I just wanted to add that too. And before my dad died, he did want to say he recommended John for the position, for what that's worth. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Lars Anderson, Woodfall Road. I also work for the police since 2005. I know I want to give you guys credit for Christine and Bobby for the job that you did recommending. I know John isn't in the final two, unfortunately. I just want to say that as somebody that's gone through an assessment center, it can be a pretty stressful thing. I think, obviously, the more you would do, I think you could become a lot better at it. I know Chief Wilhelmy had never done one before, so I don't know, like John Harney said, if who knows how well Chief Mann would have done. But I just want to say John is somebody that I've tried to mold my own career after, and I think he's a fantastic guy. Hopefully, you guys can see that and somehow make a recommendation that he's there tomorrow. But again, that's not up to me.
Thank you. Back. All right, we're back. Who else? Anyone else? Colleen?
Just one quick thing, again, Jack Rose. I asked a question before, and I didn't really make the statement. But like I said, the point was that the system was very analytical. Interim Chief Wilhelmy, I think that's his proper title. Fortunately, I'm retired out of corporate America. I know how interviews go, resumes go, references, and they're all subject to some debate, no matter how you do it, no matter how the process works. Fortunately, being retired, riding around town, I've seen a marked better police presence in this town in the last couple of years, and I think a lot of it is because of the young trained officers that have come in, that are college educated, whether it matters or not, that's not the point. They're trained very well. Look at the support here, and some of them I know as police officers. There are some chiefs in this Commonwealth that a police officer wouldn't go to bat for, and they're the boss. These guys are going to bat, and ladies, I'm sorry, Shelley, they're going to bat for this guy. It means something. The point that Joe made about Massachusetts statutes, very important. We have a guy here that you guys rely on to help you with that. But that's very important. I always found him to be professional, authoritative, and knowledgeable about every process that he's done. I hope you at least consider him in the three. You have two, at least consider him like Paul recommended. Thank you.
All right, anybody else? Mel? All right, Mel Siebold.
Mel Seabolt, Police Chief Search Committee, Snyder Road. I think one thing that Bob omitted in the report was that a survey was sent out to the sworn personnel of the Medfield Police Department. We asked them for if they'd like to tell us characteristics of the next chief. They had a chance to basically put it in writing. It was confidential, and we only had 5 respondents. So also,
Well, I mean, what conclusion do you draw from that?
well, being a former law enforcement officer and president of a very large police association for almost a decade, if you want to support a candidate, if you know one of your internal people is a candidate, you make it clear everyone responds to that, and then you basically come out and when you. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you want to just turn around.
Personally, my take on it was that the police department had a chance to respond and basically put their recommendations in for the internal candidate, and only five of the sworn officers in the department responded. Also, and I think what's more important to me, being an elected official in this town and sitting with 4 civilians and several department heads, the composition of this committee, I think we're unanimous in our recommendations, and I think to attempt to circumvent our recommendation basically will speak to going forward when you ask citizens and department heads in the future to belong to different search committees. We had many discussions because of the in-town talk going around in the past few weeks. Some members expressed concern that there may be a movement to basically negate our recommendation. It was unanimous. The past, I heard someone comment about the past chief selection committee. Chief Meany was one of 2 that was given to the board. I believe Chief Carrico was the only candidate given to the board. And, you know, what differentiates him from the number of candidates? We've spent 7.5 months here doing some serious work for the town. We weren't playing board games at those meetings. This is very important to every member, especially for members, citizen members who have never been involved in this type of process. So I would ask that the selectmen agree with our recommendation and interview the 2 unanimous candidates. Thank you.
Thank you. Yep, let's go in the back there. Pete, you want to say something?
I can just get into my character.
Yeah. That one works over there. They both work.
Oh, okay.
Get as close as you want.
All right. Oh, okay. John Gary, I'm a sergeant with the police department. I've been a police officer for 30 years. I've been with the police department almost 25. To talk to the point of the search, well, no, what you sent out, the survey. That survey talked about equipment, talked about what would you like to changes in the department. From what I understand, and maybe I'm wrong, it didn't talk about specifics. If it did talk about specifics, could I have a raise of hands here who would ask for John Wilhelmi? Thank you. And secondly, I think that out of 6 of the people that responded, we had 14 members on the department, and it may have already gone down to 12, and I think probably 3 or 2 were on probation. 2 were on probation, and they wouldn't get involved. They're on probation. So if in Brookline, if 40% of the department responded, how many officers would that have been?
About?
Approximately 60. 60. So if you got 60, respondents to that. Would you think that was a good response? No. You wouldn't? No. Okay.
Can we get Mel the microphone, though, if we're going to be questioning him?
It's not working again.
It's off on the fritz again.
So I think Mel wanted to speak last to try to talk about that point, which that point is irrelevant to everything what all of us have been talking about here tonight.
And I will say, I mean, there's no way at 8:15 anyone's speaking last at a selectmen's meeting.
No, I understand. Maybe
let's speak last.
Well, maybe this topic, I don't know.
Yeah.
But one thing I do know is that if these people have stepped into Medfield for 6 hours and took an assessment center and stepped back out, and those are the people that you're choosing, other than a person that was a dispatcher, a patrol officer, a sergeant, administrative sergeant, a deputy chief, now chief, there's something a little skewed with that process. And I've been through assessment centers, and I can tell you, and everybody else can tell us, if you've done something a whole bunch of times, like I can guarantee these other people have, you're going to get better at it. If you're grading this on 6 hours of an assessment center, and I don't think that should be a piece of the pie, don't get me wrong, it should be, but it certainly shouldn't be the whole thing. What it should be, who's been walking in the door for almost 40 years and has come through and has done everything. He's handled more. I can't bring the stuff up that he's handled, and I've worked with him, and all of us have worked with him through the years. We can't talk about that stuff here. And if we could, you would end the meeting and appoint him tonight. Guaranteed. Thank you.
Mike, can I just say,
Yeah.
because the assessment center keeps coming up, it is not the all and be all. And for Michelle, it's the first time she went through the assessment center.
Paul?
Just one last thing.
You got to go to one of the microphones here. Sorry about that.
Yeah. We didn't bring any batteries. No batteries.
Everybody has an extra
Whoops. Is this the one that's working?
Yes, that one works. That one works.
This was the first time I've heard of this, Mr. Wilhelmy not being on the list. I'm on a few committees in Medfield myself. I was going to a housing authority one tonight, and I had to blow that one off to come here. But I will tell you something about the way that force is trained. With all the streets in this town, new streets, for the police officers to be able to find out where they're going, how to get there, they manage to get there pretty fast. And they're down Tilden Village more than enough because of the elderly. I presume if the rest of the town had known that, I think they presumed where he was acting chief, even under Meany and the others, they probably presumed that he was going to get it. But by not knowing, if they knew that there was a big hearing about it and that he didn't even get picked for the two, you probably have to get the high school to fill him up with the regular residents. They send surveys to my house all the time. I don't fill them out half the time. They're saying about the state hospital, about this, about that. I'll probably be dead before they rip the first building down.
I hate it when people say that about the state hospital.
But I recommend that you put them on as one of the three and go for it, because there's nothing like common sense in a person that knows the town better than anybody else. And that goes a long way.
Thank you, Paul. Pete, you got a question?
I was just going to follow up and say that where we are has been very difficult for me, because I got to know John Wilhelmy over the past year, and I didn't know him and don't know him really all that well at this point even. But what impressed me was reading the comments of the officers, and I thought there were more than 5, Mel, in the materials that we had. There were just 5. I know that there were only 5, even from Well, is that just officers? Because I thought there were more than 5 submissions. Okay.
I will remind you that the contents of those are confidential. We promised the officers that they would remain confidential when they filled them out.
Well, what I was just going to say is that I learned a lot about Chief Wilhelmi through that. That was very complimentary, and so to me that was enlightening.
That's it? That's it. Oh, okay. Anybody else have a comment or a question before we go on?
Where are you going from here, Mr. Chairman?
Well, we probably have another 3 hours of this meeting left to go on everything else. But you know, as I noted at the outset, I mean, tomorrow night we have a meeting scheduled to interview these 2 candidates. And that's what we will do tomorrow night. And then we have to talk now about what else we're going to do. And then tomorrow night is on the agenda to deliberate on the potential appointment of a police chief after those interviews. And so that's what we'll do next.
Not clear.
Well, you need a microphone, John.
Saying that
Yeah. Can you, I don't want to make John walk all the way up here. Thank you. You have a longer.
They're going to work. Boy.
I don't think we're...
Let me make sure, let me get well. We're either all going to go darker. This is going to work.
Yeah.
And John, I will note that even though Paul mentioned the hospital, we're just talking about the police chief.
I don't believe, Mr. Chairman, that we're clear as to whether you are going to respond to the request either by discussion and vote or simply ignore the request that Chief Wilhelmi be added to the list of candidates.
I don't think we're there yet.
You're not there yet.
We have to discuss it
You will
now.
discuss it.
We are going to, when everyone's done, we're going to discuss it, right here, right in front of everybody.
Fine.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh. There we go. All right. Pete and Gus, thoughts, comments, considerations?
I think it's very hard to go against a committee that we've appointed to bring us their results. They mentioned that in their minds there was a clear separation. We appoint people to work for the town on these committees, and I think to not pay attention to their results. They're the ones who had the hands-on. It clearly was a lot of work. I thank you guys for the amount of effort you put into it. Clearly, you knew that this was not going to be a popular decision, but I think that it's hard to go against their recommendation.
Okay. So you don't want to add?
I don't think that's right to do, I'm afraid.
Okay.
Let me touch a number of things here that are in my mind. First, to all of you that are here, to Mrs. Mann in particular, who, when I went to the funeral home for her husband, who probably had all sorts of other things she could have had on her mind as I was passing by and expressing my sympathy, her point was, please appoint John Wilhelmi. And if that wasn't enough, also, although she's not here tonight, Ann Thompson also called. Even more than that, what you all, or most, if not all of you, are expressing is a profound respect for John Wilhelmi. However this whole process turns out, that message, I think maybe I kind of understood it a little bit, but I didn't understand it the way I do now until you all have, in various ways, have communicated that. So quite aside from what the decision is, that piece about John Wilhelmi being a well-loved, well-respected, revered member of the police force, that stands no matter what. That's on one side. Like Pete, there's a committee here that has worked for 7 or 8 months that is made up of people who have competence, who have dedication, and to the best of my knowledge, from anything I've heard about anything they've done, I don't believe there are any claims or complaints about the integrity of the process they followed. So we've created a committee, we've asked them to put a lot of work into something, they did that, and they came in with their best recommendation. And I side with Pete on this, that if we're going to ask people to put that kind of time in, we should respect it, and we should listen to them unless there's some concrete reason why we should not. The other piece, and this is, I'm not saying this to make anybody in this room feel bad, but much of what we're hearing now is something that we really should have heard 7 months ago. Quite aside from the survey, I had the same reaction you did, Mel, is that, gee, if only 5 responses came in, that's not at the front, that's not a ringing endorsement. And here's why I say that. Number one, it would have saved everybody a whole lot of time if we had decided to do this in a different way. But number two, it's not just John Wilhelmi who's in this mix. We have 2 people who have been recommended to be considered to be hired as the chief of police for Medfield, both of whom, in the opinion of the committee, are highly qualified, and from what I can see, they also are qualified. The arguments that just because you haven't lived here forever is why you're not qualified, well, we wouldn't have a fire chief right now, or at least we wouldn't have the fire chief we have had. And sometimes that kind of insular thinking is exactly what you don't need in a town. Sometimes you need the voice or the perspective of somebody else coming in. So that by itself doesn't automatically make it a bad thing to do.
We wouldn't have had Mike Sullivan either. Fall River.
Yeah, and
Yeah, John Wilhelmi doesn't live in Medfield. He's never been to
the issue is the long-standing, if you automatically just say, oh, we just got to keep, we always grow from within. On the other hand, I think this town probably could do a little bit better at being methodical and proactive about deliberately growing from within, because I think there's some messages coming in, and I doubt it's just with the police department, with young, energetic, enthusiastic, talented people joining various town departments, and presumably with aspirations for their career, and we could probably do a better job of actually giving them true opportunities and wind up with a stronger town. That's what's in my head right now. The question that I have around just add somebody. First point, my preference, if we were going to do that, is I would ask this committee, having heard everything that was said today, if you have any reason, and I'm not doing this to twist your arm, if you have any reason why you change your position, tell us that. Otherwise, I side with Pete that tomorrow, at the very least, we do exactly what we said we were going to do. And whatever, if we do anything else beyond that, we need to do it decisively, and we need to do it quickly, because we have 2 people who think that they are in good faith under consideration for this job. And if suddenly we do that, and then we go, but we think we're going to think about it, I just think it's not good faith. It's not a good way for us to go about doing that. If we do those interviews, and we come to a collective decision that we're not sure that either one hits the target as good as they were in the process, that opens up a different set of questions. So that's where I am for tomorrow, is I don't think we upset any apple carts. We keep it the way it's going, but that's, A, if there's any further insight from the committee, I'm open to hearing it. B, if we do that and we still have lingering doubts, then I'm open to the selectmen basically saying we don't think we're not satisfied we're there yet. There's one last thing I would say that we as a town should do, is if that's the direction we go and we pick somebody. Personally, I realize in this assessment center, I guess the people in the assessment center don't get feedback. Other assessment centers, sometimes that's the great thing about an assessment center, is everybody who does it, even if you don't get picked, you get feedback. And somehow I would like to find a way, if there's definable gaps, that we identify them, we feed them back, and we figure out a way to help address those gaps, so that if the interest is there and the commitment is there, we set it up where that doesn't become a shortfall in the future, if that's where things go. So, long-winded answer, indecisive, I understand, but there's several factors here that I'm considering practically speaking, for tomorrow night, I wouldn't change what we have on the docket unless I hear something from the committee that says you think we should.
Is the whole committee here?
No.
No, the committee, the committee hasn't posted a meeting. The committee can't meet and give a recommendation from the audience here. Sure, Paul.
Well, you say you hired a committee and you should go by the recommendations. I know this town has hired a lot of committees, they didn't go by it. But I'll give you a for instance. We've got a warrant committee that does more work than anybody on everything. And you know what? When they get to town meeting, sometimes what they voted to do, the town said, no. I don't think it would hurt you to have a third person here. At least have them sit here with the two. That's not going to demoralize the other two, because when we hired Meany, the other two just went away, went back to their jobs. But like I say,
Paul,
a lot of committees just get thrown down.
Paul, well, first off, for the record, the warrant committee until last year, rarely over the last 10 years, didn't get the taxpayers to go along with them, and both Mike and I can attest to that. Here's the one issue I have about what you're saying, Paul. 3 people show up tomorrow. Let's just say that's the scenario. What are the people that are recommending we do that in this room expecting this Board of Selectmen to do tomorrow? We have a straight-up interview of all 3, and then we choose the one we want, and if it's not the one you want, that's the end of it?
But would you do it that night, or would you
Well, that's...
go into a session sometime and talk it over between the 3?
So that's why I said let's not do something tomorrow night, because I'm not satisfied that, although people said put a third one in, I'm not sure the people who are suggesting that are actually saying, and then do a straight-up evaluation, and whatever you guys come up with is the one we want. Well, yeah, I'm not attacking anyone in particular, but I'm trying to play that scenario out tomorrow night. And I think that's not a good scenario to be playing out on the winging tomorrow night. That's where I'm coming out for tomorrow night.
But you understand the minutes, the agenda that you posted for tomorrow night says discussion of interviews, deliberation on appointment of police chief, and whether or not to offer a candidate the position of police chief. So, I mean, I kind of read that to say that at the end of your meeting, you guys will have reached a decision.
Or will...
Well, yeah, I mean, the reach decision could be hire one of these two or hire neither of these two.
Right, which
Right, it
just
says whether-
kind
I mean,
of contravenes what Gus just said.
Right.
Gus just basically said you might come out of the meeting tomorrow night with the requirement to, or the recommendation to have a third interview.
That would be if we decided we weren't prepared to move ahead with one of the 2 candidates tomorrow night.
Well, then.
And we can't, I mean, from an agenda and open meeting law nerd perspective, we can't even think about deliberating and making the appointment unless that's on the agenda.
So the question, I guess, is, are you making the appointment tomorrow night if you're satisfied with one of those 2?
We don't know. Yes, if we think one of those 2 is the best candidate, we probably appoint one of those 2, I would think.
All right, so there is a I just want, so that everybody in the room understands, there's a possibility that tomorrow night you will make a decision to hire someone.
Here's what I'll tell you about. I guarantee you we will make a decision tomorrow night. What that decision will be, we don't know.
Well,
right? And I think...
You're guaranteed. I was going to make a crack about the quality of the decision, but I won't, because I respect the decisions that you've made in the past, so I won't say that. But
we try to bat about 500 if we can.
Yes. But I just want to make sure I don't. There was a hint of a false hope, perhaps, in I think what I heard Gus say, that he was open to going forward for a third candidate. But I mean, there is a very strong, very possible that you will make a decision tomorrow night.
What I was trying not to do right here on the spot was completely rule that out, having only heard it within the last hour. And I mean this sincerely, this demonstration says something about how a good number of people in the town view John Wilhelmi, and that's not an irrelevant thing. Whether that's something that should change the process we use to get to the police chief is quite a different issue than where recognizing who he is and what he represents inside the police department and what he represents to the town.
If I could speak to that briefly, Bill, to Gus's point, because I think from a just purely open meeting law standpoint, we can't interview anybody else tomorrow night, right? It's within 48 hours. You have to push it back. We have 2 people scheduled to come. I mean, the reality is, at this point, we have a lot more information about Chief Wilhelmi than we do about anybody else, right? I've never seen either of these 2 people. All I know about them is what is in the materials that have been provided by the committee. And I think I agree with Gus and Pete that I'm not going to, sitting here today, say my judgment based on a lot that I know about Chief Wilhelmi, which is a lot more than I knew about last May. And I also agree with Gus that a lot of this would have been very helpful over the 6 weeks we spent talking about the process we were going to use. It's very difficult to come to the end when you don't like the substantive answer and then go back and say, wait a second, you should have had a different process. Because nobody would complain about the process if it had yielded a different result. And so the time to talk about the process is when you're actually discussing the process, which we did in front of everybody on TV. And I say in front of everybody, it was in front of Christine and Mark and Bill Massaro for the most part. All right.
Which is the problem.
Right. And so, and again, I respect the concerns that people have. I have the same concern. It's the same issue with any hiring process, right? When we hire people, each process privileges a certain set of skills, right? And a job has, if it's got 100 skills, you can only test X number of them in any kind of hiring process, right? You try to do the best job that you can, get the most inputs that you can, but there's always going to be some skills that don't get picked up in the process, right? So I'm not going to sit here saying right now my judgment is better than the 9 people on the committee, including 2 of whom who have a lot more law enforcement experience than I do and have spent a lot of time on this. And the reason I thought this process was appropriate was exactly that reason, to get the judgment of other people who have greater expertise than I do. And so obviously we know a heck of a lot more about Chief Wilhelmi now than we did last May, because he's been the acting chief for 6 months, right? And whatever consideration that the committee gave to that, it's certainly going to be a consideration that I'm going to give to it, right? And whether he's interviewed tomorrow night or not, that's going to be a consideration, and that's going to be a comparison, right? But I can't say right now we're going to just add him to the list and interview him and change the process. I mean, that I did not spend all the time that these folks did on vetting these people and analyzing these folks. And yes, I recognize they come from different places. I grew up 20 minutes from Cheshire, Connecticut, and can comment about Cheshire, Connecticut all you want. But the reality is, we have no idea who these folks are and how they're going to appear. And so I want the board to give them the respect and the courtesy of the interview they've been offered and that they've accepted to come here tomorrow night. And that doesn't mean anything's being ruled out. It doesn't mean anything's being ruled in. And that's the next step in this process. And then we will have to discuss, again, in front of everyone, what we think of that and what we think of that in light of Chief Wilhelmi, in light of the job and everything else, and then decide where we're going to go from there. Right, and I think it will be a challenging decision for us, and I very much appreciate the input that everyone has had of late on this issue, and take that into account and take it seriously. And I will say, even before all of the talk and chatter of the last few weeks on this, this is something that I have given a lot of thought to. And it's been a serious consideration for me, and I think it sounds like for Pete and for Gus as well. But I don't see any reason now to say at the end, okay, thank you, you've given us this recommendation, but we're just going to kind of brush that aside. And then for these other 2 folks, if they were to see that, they say, oh, wow, gee, they've already made up their mind, why am I going to come here? And then, who's going to apply for any jobs in town if that's the way it's going to work, right? And I think in the future, if we have a similar situation, we have to address it up front in a different way maybe than we did this time. But again, we didn't have that information that we had last May because he didn't have that 6 months acting as chief of police. So I think for tomorrow night, we're going to interview these 2 individuals, and I don't think that means any of us has decided it's definitely going to be one of these 2 come hell or high water, right? I mean, if the conclusion is it's neither, and then we'll decide what's from there. But we don't know. Yes, sir.
Gus, just to clarify a point that you mentioned, you stated that you'd like to see young guys, they were in the department, get specialty positions, move on up. How are we supposed to do that if we look now at we're going outside and not promoting within? In 2014, guys left. There were no promotions. There were no specialties. We had probably 17, 18 members. We were down to 8. Guys were forced, weekends, holidays, 24 hours straight, way past any law regulation. We're supposed to be there for 16 hours straight. They were there for 24 hours at some time. Guys left. We were down to 8 people. 1 was injured. I'm going to tell you right now, and it's not a threat to anyone, a lot of those same people, because there were probably 8 to 10 people under 5 years in 2014. We have that same amount of people now, and they will be gone.
Can I answer that question? You can take, because I'll take that one on. If we hire someone in-house, it's not because they had 40 years in the job, not tenure. It's because they're the best. If we don't hire in-house, it's because we found somebody who's the best, and at least to the best of our ability to figure that out. So the idea that well, I think we've already clarified that's not how that decision was made. If we go outside, the message is we're looking for the best people that we can, because that's our job. These are the two leading public safety officers in this town. We have a job to find the absolute best public safety officers we can. My point about the younger people is I think you do want to build, and you do want to develop people, and you do want to give them the opportunity to do that. So where perhaps some of that we've done in the past has just been by osmosis, or at least not as deliberate an effort as we might be able to do. I'm saying in the future, you want to do that. You do want to promote from within, but not just because somebody's been there a long time. It's because over the time they've been there, they've developed the skills and the abilities that they are, in fact, the best choice when it comes time to pick them.
So,
please.
So I would just say again that I've learned a lot from reading the comments, the 5 people that submitted comments that are in this package that we received. There was a lot of information there that I didn't know about how the police officers felt and how the police officers in Medfield worked. I actually told Christine on the phone this morning that was information that I wished I had known a long time ago as a selectman, and that I hope that when she runs the town, or now that she is running the town, that she is going to be running it in a way that information gets to me as a selectman. I want to make sure that officers have some sort of career path, so you don't just think of being a patrol officer for 30 years or something of that sort, that there is some way to structure it within the budgetary constraints that we have to make people want to think of a career in the Medfield Police Department as something that's very attractive to them. I mean, I didn't realize that there was this issue of not being career paths in Medfield, so my eyes have been opened.
Yes, Kelly.
I just wanted to ask if there's a reason why, I know you said tomorrow night whether you interview 2 candidates, which is on the agenda, I get all that, why there feels like there's this urgency to make a decision based on all the support tonight to have a courtesy, at least a courtesy interview for John Wilhelmi, why that couldn't be scheduled, and then you can make an educated decision after all 3 interviews. I don't know, understand the urgency for a possible decision after hearing 2 interviews. And just a quick aside about the timing of all this too, it was just yesterday that the names of the final candidates who will be interviewed came out. So as far as support for John, I mean, yeah, I think everybody is guilty of knowing what they feel in their heart, but maybe not able to speak it. And it was literally yesterday when the names were released. So hence the outpouring is today. So that's, don't know if you have an answer to the idea of doing your interviews, possibly considering a 3rd interview on a different day when you have time to actually put it on an agenda and then make a decision based on all that.
I will here. I'll answer that for myself, and then Gus and Pete can answer. I don't think it would be respectful to just give an interview as a courtesy, to say, well, we don't really want to interview you, but we'll let you come in and
I
hear.
mean a courtesy based on tonight's
situation. But I think I understand what you're saying, right? But if there's going to be an interview, it should be someone that you're seriously considering hiring and want to hire, right? And so, at this point, here's the urgency from my perspective, right? You have candidates who are applying for the job. They're not going to hang on forever, right? So if you're going to sort of extend the process, however long you're going to extend the process, they may just decide we're done, right? And so you can only have this, and this is part of the problem. And again, there's no way around the hiring of public officials being a public process, but it makes it for a very awkward hiring situation, right? I mean, if you're in outside the public eye, you can be a candidate and a finalist. This happens a lot for months, right? And you kind of doing a lot of vetting and additional work and transition and all that sort of stuff. But this obviously has to be done publicly, and it should be done publicly because it's an office of public trust. But I think from my perspective, the urgency of scheduling it is simply that, waiting 2 weeks. I mean, I think we're going to all stipulate that a lot of people in town who know Chief Wilhelmy, like him, think well of him, think he'd do a good job as chief, and want him to be the chief. And I don't think any of us is thinking, I don't think anyone's surprised at the support that he's received, and I don't think it's something it's not a surprise to me that when I learned what the names were, I knew exactly what this meeting was going to be like. And so I think in order to make any kind of a decision or vote, it's got to be on the agenda. And so we have no idea what we're going to hear tomorrow night.
Right.
We have no idea how we're going to react. We have no idea what the discussion is going to be. If we don't have any vote on there, then it's just interviews, and it's like, okay, well, thanks for coming. We'll post it for another 72 or hours later.
Well,
I was just how it works.
You've got tomorrow night is an exception to the rule. It's not a normal meeting. So I guess I would assume you would do that again.
But we posted it 48 hours in advance.
48
as
hours,
required.
but I'm not talking 2 weeks. I mean,
No, I understand that.
That's
but-
all.
Just one question I'd like you to ask both of those candidates tomorrow, which has been asked to all the other candidates, chiefs that applied for the job in the past. Would they be willing to move to Medfield?
Yes.
Instead of living in, what state did she live in? Connecticut.
Yeah.
One's in Rhode Island, one's in Connecticut.
One of the candidates, Michelle, lives in Hopkins.
Still a long way from here in an emergency. I guess you could put a school fire out from
15 air
there.
miles by law.
That is one of the questions in terms of where they decide to
That was the
reside.
one that
Yeah,
decided whether they would be
Yeah.
willing to move.
Yeah.
closer.
yeah, absolutely.
When it really was just down
Can I give an answer to Colleen's question?
You can give
So,
whatever you'd like to say.
let me answer Colleen's original question as well. Here's how I look at it. We could decide that we're just going to open it up to a third person. And that decision by the Board of Selectmen is telling this committee that we really don't care what your recommendations were. You came in with what you came in with, and look at what's going on. We're going to ignore everything that you've done for 7 months as legitimately as you've done it. We're just going to say, well, you didn't come up with the answer that we wanted in the first place. That's what I'm not willing to do. I'm willing to go and interview these two candidates, and if tomorrow night, at the end of those interviews, we sit there and we're still not comfortable, we've got the person that we want or that we need, then I'm willing to say, thanks for your recommendations, we're not sure we like either one of them enough to call the shot, we want to look further. That's okay. But the idea that we would up front say, no, it's going to be 3, you said 2, but we're just running in a third one, I think that undercuts the committee in a way they do not deserve, because they've done the work they've done, and as far as I can tell, they've done a thorough, conscientious job to the best of their abilities, and that's why I wouldn't want to do that. The reason I also wouldn't want to do it is if I'm one of the two candidates coming in tomorrow and I suddenly hear, they suddenly, you were the two candidates, but actually there's a third one who already works there, and they're going to come in another 2 weeks. If I'm one of those candidates, I'm sitting there going, yeah, right, I've been there, I've been to this rodeo, I know how it works, and I just write us off. And I would prefer that we not do that either.
If they've been to that rodeo, that means they weren't picked before either.
No, I'm just saying maybe that's happened to them before.
All right, I think we know what we're doing.
We know what we're doing for the next 24 hours, anyway.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
All right. What do we want to do next? Jason, Jason is here. Jason is looking to be appointed to the Safety Committee. Are you still?
Yes.
It's a lot safer.
Right. Okay. Do we have a motion?
So I move that we appoint Jason Hrechik to the Safety Committee.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right.
Behind you is the other member.
Oh, hey, Nate. All right, let's go through some of these action items. We have this request from the Medfield Garden Club to receive financial support from the local meals tax for maintenance and planting of municipal sites. We have all received a number of letters from members of the Garden Club suggesting that the Garden Club does not need this money.
Right, that was a surprise.
Yeah, but my view of that is we should defer this pending further fact-finding and an opportunity for the Garden Club, who thinks they do need the money, to come in and say it. And anyone disagree?
Nope. That's fine, although the last time we did that, we had a fight.
Oh, I know. All right, we have a recommendation from the Council on Aging to appoint Katie Robinson to the vacant Council on Aging board seat. Any questions, comments, concerns? Motion.
I move that we appoint Katie Robinson to the vacant COA board seat.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yep.
We have a request from the Route 495 Partnership for the $500 annual municipal contribution. 495 Partnership board member Sarah Raposa here tonight. Any questions, concerns about the $500 annual contribution to the 495 Partnership?
Nope.
We have a motion.
I move that we approve the $500 donation to the Route 495 Partnership.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We have a request from Mr. Anthony DeLappa to forgive outstanding taxes in the amount of $83,907 and accept the offer to convey the parcels to the Conservation Commission. Does anybody think we need to discuss this before we say no?
Before we say no.
Can't legally do it.
Oh.
Well, that takes care of that then.
But I don't think we should do it anyway.
I didn't either.
Yeah, I did either on the original agenda, I didn't get any supporting materials, and I was tied up today, so if it came out today, I never saw what the story was behind this, so.
Well, the treasurer recommends against it.
Yeah.
So
So there's a letter from Mr. DeLappa. He owns several
Not quite
parcels.
sure
He
why
hasn't
we
paid
should.
taxes on it in
Yeah.
some time.
Yeah.
He's accrued some interest and fees. He's offering to donate the land which is not buildable to the town in exchange for forgiveness of the outstanding taxes.
Okay.
And the treasurer has said no, and so he's followed up and is requesting us to say yes.
Okay. And Mark, you're saying it's not legal to do that?
No, if somebody's going to donate land to the town, he has to be current in their taxes. That being said, if the treasurer collector were to put the property into tax title foreclosure, at that point, she has the authority, actually it's a town meeting authority, to accept a deed in lieu of foreclosure.
Okay.
And that can only be utilized if that's the only lien against the property, the outstanding taxes.
Mark, can she collect the taxes beyond the property, or is it just a lien on the property?
It's a lien on the property. You can't go after the.
collect
No,
beyond
you have to put it
property.
into foreclosure.
So
And
the
I-
value of the property is the extent of what you're going to get in the end anyway.
Correct.
Okay.
The only question I would wonder about is also from a tax standpoint, if someone says they're donating land in exchange for forgiveness of a tax, do they also think they can claim the donation for taxes? It seems like
Oh, yeah,
you
they
would not
would.
want that to happen.
Well, yeah, sure, that would be a
Actually, it
charitable
works the other way, because in fact, it's putative income.
Right, the 83,000.
So,
Okay.
and I've actually had aware of similar situations where the municipality then issues a
Also,
1099.
that's reportable income then to them, huh?
Right.
Forgiveness.
So the donation is, so if somebody had land, if there was no tax, if somebody donated land for conservation purposes, they would have a deduction.
That's between them and the IRS. We don't get involved in that. They have to get an appraisal by a certified appraiser. The IRS has gotten very strict on those.
Well, because I would almost think that if we were going to do something like this, well, I guess if you did the foreclosure, you take the money you can get, or you take the land you can get. But if this were a proposition that we actually wanted to go after, we'd want an appraisal of the land. Are we paying $83,000 for a $25,000 piece of land, or?
Well, as I said, it's totally outside of permissible process anyway.
So we voting it down is what we're doing?
Nate, do you have a?
Just a quick comment on that. Just from putting my nerd glasses on, I looked it up, and there's 3 other parcels. One's contiguous to 5 Birch, it's 9 Birch, and there's a couple on Trailside that seem to have the same owner. I'm just wondering.
He was a developer of that.
Right, yeah, put it together, but I guess the only ones that are listed on there's 5 of them, but there's 3 other properties that are listed as they're not on there. So I wonder like what the
That he
status
owns,
is.
you mean, and that
Yes.
he's not donating?
Correct.
Oh.
That seems to be the case from looking
They might
at the
be
GIS.
buildable then, I bet.
Very possibly. And to that point, who knows I don't know if they've been negotiated away to an adjacent, homeowner for a yard, what have you. But I would just question why those other ones aren't on there. If they're of value, why the town wouldn't get the full value of as much as it could if we're going to forgive, we're not going to forgive $83,000, but if we were going to go that route to get as much as we could for the town.
You might have answered your own question as to why they're not included in the donation.
Right, sure. Hey, but it's just interesting to see that they were out there, in that sense.
You
So.
convinced me.
You could go back and pull the approved subdivision plan and see if those are approved lots, and that would be a starting point as to whether they are buildable on
There's some slope issues on
slope and wetlands.
Right, I know the brook goes through there and what have you.
So
some of them.
Here's what I would suggest. I would suggest that we write back to him and tell him no, for now, and we can't do this. And I don't have any appetite to forgive the taxes on it. Right? I mean, to the extent he has other more valuable lots worth $83,907 that he wants to donate to the town, then maybe we can put something like that to the town meeting. But otherwise, I don't see any reason to do it, or even to try to do it.
All I can say is if he were here tonight, rest his soul, Mike would have plenty to say about this.
Yes, I know he would. I know he would. So, can that letter come from you, Mark? It came from his attorney?
Oh, I haven't even seen it, if you
Yeah,
want
there's a
me.
letter from his attorney. If you
Well, the
could-
short answer is it's not legal,
Yeah.
so.
Well, if you could write back on behalf of the board and leave it at that, and you can talk to Sarah if there's anything else that is worth talking about as part of a larger transaction that might be of interest to the town, interest to the Affordable Housing Trust, interest to somebody. They can have that discussion. We can come back, but I think a polite, respectful, curt response would be fine.
If the town were to get it in the end, I wouldn't suggest that we take it for conservation purposes, that we have it municipal purposes. So
Well,
we can do with
if you
what
go
we
through a
want.
tax title, that's a whole separate process, and ultimately, it becomes, if you go through the whole process, the land becomes available to the town, to a custodian for whatever, any municipal purposes. You can then dispose of it as excess property. You can then transfer it to conservation, whatever the town meeting chooses to do.
Okay. We have a request from Sarah Raposa, town planner, still here, to sign a mass development real estate technical assistance application for Medfield State Hospital. It's too bad John Honey left. I'm sure he'd want to heard of this. I know you
There's
didn't.
enough people here to have this conversation. I'm actually here representing the Development Committee, of which Mr. Murphy is a part of. But at the last Development Committee meeting, the committee discussed this opportunity that just came open in the past month. And it's from Mass Development. They offer real estate services technical assistance. They're in grants of up to $50,000. The committee felt that this was a good opportunity to pursue some of the questions that remain from the State Hospital Master Planning process, and that they're finding in their work with the developer interviews. So what they would like to do is submit to Mass Development for 3 issues. The first being additional professional investigation of expected utility infrastructure cost and payment mechanisms. The second, additional professional investigation of environmental remediation associated with existing structures on the site. And the third would be drafting an RFQ package, and I know that probably seems a little premature, but this is part of what Mass Development program is aimed at. It's aimed at the disposition of surplus municipal properties. So theoretically, that is a direction that we are moving in. We're going to ask for the full amount, but we don't have any scopes of work for this work, but it could be developed if approved by Mass Development. So it's also due on Friday.
Okay.
So, Sarah, I thought I saw that there was 10,000 and 10,000 being asked for, and not 50?
Yeah, they were just ballpark estimates.
But I thought you just said you're asking for the full 50.
Oh, I'm sorry. You know what? yesterday afternoon, I sent out a revised version of the application. And I apologize that it was late. Part of this cycle with this, the
So you're asking
committee
for the full
members.
50?
Yeah, they weren't
Great,
actually able to
great.
review the draft. So that was my draft, and then they came back and supplemented this.
Okay. Sounds fine to me.
Me too.
Mr. Massaro.
Oh, may I actually say one more thing? I just want to acknowledge that there is the requirement for the town to reimburse Mass Development upon the eventual sale of the property. That's one of their requirements for municipalities.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Massaro.
So I was at the meeting, and I just want to make a comment. I'm certainly not objecting to grant. One of the things I thought they talked about as, what I saw was an opportunity to resolve some long-standing issues that we had, like, for example, what's the infrastructure really cost? Is it really $25 million, or is it cheaper, or is there another way to get infrastructure into the property at a cheaper cost, a lower cost, which would help then in evaluating the bids or whatever that you got and the expressions of interest from developers. One of the things I also heard, though, was that it might be used to get to demolition costs as well as the environmental costs. So I just wanted to make sure that's in there, because the cost of demolition has been a serious problem as we tried to do our own informal analyses of what were the costs of development up there. And you've seen numbers. The town administration has seen numbers that ran anywhere from $6 to $32 a square foot for.
Yes, demolition is
So that
addressed
would
in
be
here.
a good one to make sure that that's part of that process. And
I
then
can confirm, Bill, it is in the draft letter.
Fine. Just wanted to make sure.
Do I have to recuse myself because I'm on the development committee?
You're not going to apply to be the consultant, are you?
How much?
I just want to actually let you know that we still get the same caliber of consultants that we've been working with all along.
So we're authorizing the application for the grant is what this is.
You're not authorizing the acceptance if we
Okay.
are awarded.
Okay.
a motion?
So I move that we authorize, let's see, who has to sign it first?
Me.
Okay. We authorize the chairman of the Board of Selectmen to sign the Mass Development Real Estate Technical Assistance application requesting a grant in support of the Medfield State Hospital Development Committee's activities.
Second?
All in favor?
Yep.
Aye. Sarah, I'll give this to you right now. It was due on Friday.
Sarah gave me pizza for dinner tonight. We had a master planning committee meeting before this.
Wow.
A training.
All right.
I'm trained now.
Now I have to recuse myself as we'll move on to the Verizon portion of the evening. That contract is
That's this contract, and this is, so this is a vote to sign the First Amendment to the lease agreement between the town of Medfield and Verizon and transformer license on property between Medfield and N-Star Electric related to communications equipment on Medfield State Hospital water tower.
So moved.
Is there anything we ought to know before we approve this?
Yeah, when utilities come in to provide service, they typically require, the usual practices require an easement. In this case, and that can only be granted by town meeting. In this case, N-Star apparently is satisfied with a license agreement. So that's, counsel for Verizon went ahead and prepared it on that basis, and that's what's in front of you.
And it's going out to the Long Meadow.
It's to allow the electric utility to
Connect up on Long
connect,
Meadow.
exactly.
Okay. And does this have the same kind of terms around if the town needs something?
Now, this is a license. Frankly, I was surprised that it was satisfactory to them. I've been dealing with the various utilities for years, and they've always insisted on an easement. So.
Okay, so, sure.
Gus, I think I'd given you a copy of a memo I had written regarding the issue of access to the water tower. That right now, the way things stand, there is no public access to where that installation is going to be. So, I mean, obviously, they're going to put the cellular arrays on the water tower, and then they're going to have a structure on the ground, presumably with the rest of the, whatever kind of routers.
The cabinet, right.
Yeah, it'll be a cabinet. It might be a generator or something or whatever for emergency generator or whatever. So there's going to be needs some kind of access to that facility for maintenance.
They're going to use the same, whatever access the
There is
water
no,
department.
I'm just saying right now, just so you know, that there is no access for the public, vehicular access on the core campus. There are Jersey barriers up blocking all, Gus, you drive on the property. It says no unauthorized vehicles beyond this.
How does the water department get to the tower?
Well, they're an authorized vehicle. All I'm just pointing out is that there is, at some point, will be an issue of getting vehicular access to that piece of the property. It may not need to be addressed now. You can certainly give access to the cellular provider to get to the tower, but right now, there are Jersey barriers there that say no access.
We could probably move those then.
So you're gonna need to work out something to make sure that they have access.
It's already
there.
part of the lease that the town signed, so we're going to have to.
Well, that's,
So, Bill, does this tie into the easement that you and I, the last time we had a discussion was the the easement that came down to Hospital Road that didn't make the little jog at the, just did this
no,
straight down? That's a totally separate
I just threw
thing?
that out as a possibility for permanent access.
Right.
My only concern always about access on the property has been, since we don't know what the ultimate development is going to be on the property, we don't know what the impact of an easement or whatever that easement might be, whether that would be something that would be objectionable to a developer or whether it might be an attraction. For example, an easement for the town to get to a parking lot in the back on the hospital property to access the overlook area might be a good thing to have. But it might not be. Again, but that would be a decision that we can't make now because we don't know. So right now, there are no easements on the property, physically on the hospital property. And
So
at some point, you may have to reach a decision as to there will be an access for the cellular provider, or he can use the other access that you and I had talked
So
about.
okay, just so I understand the practical side of this, right now, it's not developed, so physically, if they need access to
You can
this,
grant it.
they can go right up, we can move some Jersey barriers, and they can just drive right in.
Absolutely.
If we were to develop the State Hospital campus and it became whatever it became, suddenly you can't just willy-nilly do that, although undoubtedly there'd be roads that would be on the perimeter, and it would just be a matter of getting off that road and getting over there, or the easement that you had mapped out, which the state had mapped out, which isn't exactly what it should have been, but it's close enough.
Yes.
That would be, by the time we get to the point where we all need an easement, we all need access to the tower, if the campus is so built up that for whatever reason, it just doesn't make any sense to kind of figure out a way to get there from there, we'd have that we would probably have to put a road in on to provide that.
Just
And that runs down to Hospital Road, from the water tower down to Hospital Road
Yes.
across the state property.
Yes.
So that,
I'm
that's
just
our
memorializing-
fail-safe.
Yeah, the way that the state did it, they did it as a straight line, and they actually, right before they got to Hospital Road, should have jogged over along the boundary between the state property and the town property, and they didn't. And it's not gonna, we're not gonna put a house there or something, so it's not a big deal. Yeah.
So like I said, I just want to memorialize that it's
Okay.
not, as,
Yep.
in the long term, it will not be as simple as it will be
Okay.
now, to just move the barriers and let them on. That's
I think that jog might have changed, actually, Bill, in the plans at some point for some reason. I don't remember, I seem to remember that changed.
Well, they're just going to piggyback, since the water department has to get to the tower with vehicles,
That's my
et cetera, so the wireless carrier will exercise whatever route the water department exercises. We're not granting them an easement, there's no need to do it in the future either, it's
For
simply
belts and
providing
suspenders, we
access.
could get there from Long Meadow if we had to.
Yeah, the neighbors are going to give you a hard time on that because they already
I'm
Okay.
sure when the property, if and when gets developed, everybody's going to want to have water service up there, and it would be important to have cellular and water service and access to the water tower.
Okay. So Pete, you have so moved, I'll so second. And we both have to sign this one, so all those in favor?
Yep.
Aye. Passed.
You probably ought to put in parens, majority of the Board of Selectmen. where there's not, so there's not a question later on what happened to the third signature.
Put that on this,
Just write in parentheses after when you're signing a majority.
okay? Okay, Mike, you're back.
Well, on another Verizon-related point, only kidding, I'm only kidding.
All right. Vote to accept the new health insurance rates from the MIA Health Benefits Trust. I think we should probably do this before they change their mind since they went down.
Yes.
2.5%, wow.
Yeah, 2.3%. We met with them last week. They assured me this is an anomaly and most likely won't happen again, and we should sign it as soon as possible.
Okay, well, who signs this?
So Evelyn and I were talking about it. In the past, Michael has signed it.
Yeah.
But you
should
can either
sign it
sign it or I can sign it, that's fine.
We have a motion.
I move that we authorize the town administrator to accept the new health insurance rates from Maya on the health benefits trust.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We now have a request to sign the FEMA reimbursement forms and contracts for the March 2018 winter storm.
Who knew that was a...
Which one? There were three.
We only got one right now. This is March 18th, I believe.
I know it's here. There it is.
That was the big one, wasn't it?
The big one. So we will receive a check back from them in the amount of $36,125.
Oh.
So we get 75% of the original cost of the storm, which was $48,000 to us. And that will go into the general fund.
Ready? I move that we sign the FEMA reimbursement forms and contracts for the March 2018 winter storm.
Second.
All in favor?
Yep.
Is this me signing?
Yes.
All of them?
All of them. I'm the
Oh,
authorized
it's
contractor, but you
just the
sign
chair.
authorizing me.
Okay.
So all the selectmen signing or just the chair?
Just the chair, I believe.
So I will,
Probably just sort of extra vote to authorize the chair to sign because you're dealing with a federal government agency.
I move that we authorize the chairman of the Board of Selectmen to sign the FEMA reimbursement forms and contracts for March 2018 winter storm.
Second.
Yes.
all in favor?
Yep.
Bill Harvey has signed. Oh, right. When do they meet?
Right. So rest of that later, we have to vote to sign the warrant for the annual town election for March 25th, 2019. That's a bunch of signing. We can do it at the end. We have a motion.
I move that we sign the March 25th, 2019 town election warrant.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Now we'll move on to ongoing fiscal year 2020 budget review and discussion, town finance discussion, discussion of proposed budget cuts, discussion of COLA, discussion and possible vote on the building capital stabilization fund, vote to approve preliminary town budgets. And then we'll add to that our discussion of the town meeting warrant, the structure of budget articles, and warrant articles as well. So,
Yes.
Christine,
Let's do some
Give us the
preliminary.
numbers.
Let's do some preliminary
Let's do
budget.
some math.
cut discussion.
Thank you.
So I've met with the department heads, and they have submitted budget cuts to me. I've met with several of them in person to go over. The total amount of budget cuts that have been submitted by town department heads is $214,450. Not all of those budget cuts are endorsed by department heads, including your library director and your senior center director, Council on Aging. I asked them to put forward cuts, and then I met with Pam this week to discuss what the cost of closing the library on Sundays was. Pam and obviously the library trustees are not in favor of closing the library, but where we were talking about closing other programs, it was something that I put forward on your sheet for you to look at.
So Christine, these budget cuts don't actually get us to any particular non-override, it's just that this is a cut.
No. So what
kind
this
of
will
cut,
get
right.
you, let me actually put this up. Next thing. So with these budget cuts, and I will tell you that the personnel board last night recommended a 2% cost of living increase
Thank you.
and a 2% merit for department heads. Actually, I have one for you now.
Yeah, it's okay. Ignorance is bliss.
So if you look at this, if you include the cost of living of 2% for the non-union employees, These numbers don't include the merit for department heads. I'm just waiting for Joy to return to work on some numbers for me. This includes the budget cuts of $214,000. There's no collective bargaining amount for police. We have not been able to meet with them yet, and that's my fault. I have not been able to schedule a time to sit down with them. Then this brings you of an override amount of $659,246.
That's overall for the town, is that just town side?
That
or-
is everything.
All right, then I have to catch up with you tomorrow.
Yes, and
Okay.
Yvonne and Georgia actually updated your sheet today,
Okay.
and they want to go over it with you tomorrow.
okay,
But
good.
they've already
Okay.
been doing that
Okay.
work for you.
So Christine, so originally what I'd been carrying here, just as a placeholder, was 4% COLA on one line with nothing for merit, and my question is, so if it's 2% COLA, 2% merit, are we budgeting anything for other market adjustments that you thought we may need to make?
There are two positions that we may need a market adjustment. The Personnel Board wanted to have some more discussion about that, so they did not make a decision about that last night.
Okay, so my point is, although I was carrying 4% just on one line, I'm trying to figure out, that was what, 250,000 or so.
Right.
So 125 is still there for COLA. The merit is,
So the merit I put into the Human Resources budget. I didn't go through and change every individual budget because I wasn't
Yep.
sure if the warrant committee and the Board of Selectmen would accept the recommendation of 2%. So I'm carrying 117,000 for a merit increase.
so my point
the-
is
so
that
it's about
that
90,000.
alone would
Yeah.
get us almost up to the 4% that I've been carrying. I mean, it's the way I
Correct.
allocated it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just don't know a number for you on the
And-
department
yeah,
head merit
okay.
increase tonight.
Okay.
Chris, are you saying that the 117 is the 2%?
It's actually, it's about 33,000 less than that. Because there was an amount in the Human Resources budget before that, so.
So it'd be like 80-something?
I think it's 80-something. It's
Yeah.
59. Yeah, yeah.
30, so
I don't have it in front of me.
that they took the original 4% I was carrying down about 70,000, but then there's a market adjustment that
Right.
may work against that. Okay. Got it.
But there are some decisions, I've made some assumptions in this budget projection worksheet. One assumption was that you would vote the 2.5% increase in the capital stabilization fund. I have also taken the liberty of taking the Bridge Street project as well as the Danielson/Ritchie's Pond project and put them in as one-time capital overrides. So taking those out brings you down to the 659.
And then what's that level of cash that we wanted to have ideally at a million?
You want to keep 1.75 in free
yeah.
cash, so this 659 utilizes no free cash.
Oh,
In order to keep that 1.75 budget number, you would only have 21,000 available for this operating budget.
okay.
And the schools haven't moved from where they approved their budget?
Honestly, I didn't have a chance to talk to Dr. Marsden today whether or not there was any movement at the school committee last night. I haven't had a chance to
Okay.
check with him about that, but I will. So I think maybe where we are meeting tomorrow night, if you want to take the budget cuts, review them more, I have backup materials I can send to you from the department heads as to what impact that is for closing hours, for changing the structure of how we're going to deliver services.
I mean, I would say my initial reaction to that is, if we're at 660 over, and that's going to go into an override article anyway, it seems to me we should have the council on aging and library hours in there as well. It just doesn't make sense to me to cut those and then still have an override. But I mean, I'd like to find a way not to have it, have it in the core budget anyway without being on the override side anyway.
Right.
Right, and I don't know where else we can look to find that, to offset those two pieces, because, I mean, to me, the Sunday opening in the library and the Saturday opening in the Council of Aging, pretty short dollars for a fairly significant community benefit in both circumstances, and so I would rather talk about what other open positions we have in other departments that are not currently filled with human beings, and whether we might just not fill some of those?
So we did do that in this, in these budget cuts. You'll see in the information technology, we did cut the person, the position, not the person. We had not filled it yet, so I've cut that position. I'm also eliminating a part-time position within the town hall as well.
And if I could just, hi, Pamela Gardner, Library Director, if I could just interject, I had offered alternative cuts to Christine that equaled about the same amount as the Sunday hours, and we would much prefer to take out elsewhere out of our operating budget.
Okay. Do you agree with that, Christine?
You'll see them on here. They're listed. That's why I put the closing on Sunday hours in red, so that you would know that that was a significant program and service delivery issue.
Yep. Okay.
In terms of the Council on Aging reducing their hours, their proposal was to not end the Saturday program, but to cut it in half, to fund it through the end of December, and they would seek grant funding, or attempt to seek grant funding to continue the program after that, but they didn't want to end it abruptly. They'd like to continue it through the summer and through December.
So they have in there July to December, and they'd spend the next 8 months or so trying to get grants to fund it for the next 6 months. That makes okay. Just out of curiosity, Christine, going back to the capital budget discussion, have we sorted out the issue with the police radios and the reserve fund transfer request?
Already approved, and I believe they're working on purchasing it, so it's all set.
We don't have to approve it? I thought for the reserve fund, we had to approve it now as well. No?
No, end of the year budget transfer.
Budget transfer, got it, okay. Good, so that's all set.
That's all set.
Excellent.
Yep.
Oh, well, that's good. Let's see. And when is the warrant committee meeting next?
Warrant committee is meeting on Monday.
Monday, all right. So we should vote tomorrow night then on...
They're looking for some feedback on this information from you, particularly in terms of some of the outlying the issues we haven't decided yet in terms of building stabilization, how you want to fund the articles at town meeting.
Yeah. I mean, I think we should appropriate the...
2.5%.
Yeah, the full amount to the building stabilization fund. Justin Pete, do you have any?
Yep, I agree with
All right,
that.
might as well vote that then.
Okay.
We have a motion to appropriate $1,025,000 to the building stabilization fund.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yep. All right. Accomplished one assignment from the warrant committee tonight.
One of the other items that I was discussing with Amanda Hall from the warrant committee, and in reviewing some of the notes, handwritten notes that Mike left me last week, 2 weeks ago, was whether or not you wanted to take the OPEB article off of town meeting and create a separate budget for that. We did not do that in this. I think we were all talking about it, but it never got translated to this. And if you want, I can remove that from the warrant and put it onto an actual budget article for the 425.
That's my, I mean, I had raised that. It doesn't, it's an administrative question because we're going to put the money in.
Right.
But rather than keep carrying it as a separate article, if it probably went in the town and school employee benefits segment of the budget, and we just carry it as a line item there, that would be my if people don't like it, they can still challenge it because it's still a line item in the budget.
Right, still be a line item in the budget.
But we don't
but
have to have a
carry it under the county
standalone article.
retirement.
It has to be voted on every year. Yeah.
Yeah, I do agree with that. Pete, what do you think?
I agree too.
And I think just to put a pin in a discussion that we ought to have after town meeting, I think consistent with the way the ALS study committee looked at this last year, I mean, I think at some point, some of the OPEB contribution has to start being carried into departmental budgets, particularly as to new hires. And so we've kind of got two components of OPEB. You've got the historical deficit that we've accumulated from not funding it in the past, and then you've got the expense of really what should be happening, just as with any kind of pension, is you ought to be making contributions each year in respect of the people who are employees who are going to get that benefit.
But I wouldn't distribute it down to the budgets, because now you're going to have little mini OPEB lines in every single department. What I would do is just use a financial policy that says every time we hire somebody, it's not a net hire, it's any time there's a new employee hired, we increase the OPEB contribution by $5,000. So it shows up. Again, if we use this thing, that's all above the operating budgets anyway, because it's a decision that's made. Otherwise, it's going to be, it would be like the way we distribute electric charges. it's like sometimes it would be a little nicer to know what our total electric bill is for the town. So that's how I'd recommend we do it.
So my only concern with that is, just from a departmental budget standpoint, is that to a certain extent, it punishes the departments that are more careful in hiring, right? Because you're sort of, one department hires 10 people, and then the additional OPEB costs associated with that hiring goes sort of above the line. Another department figures out how not to have to hire anybody else, and their budget is still squeezed by their share of that amount that's added to the OPEB amount. And so, just in terms of kind of department heads thinking about how to allocate budgets within their departments, and I agree with you from an administrative standpoint, it's annoying, right? And we don't do it with health benefits, right? We don't do it with, and there's other reasons for that too, but that is part of the cost of hiring, and it does take some of the pressure off of department heads in terms of managing headcount if it's carried above the line. As to the future going obligation, not as to the accumulated deficit should be dealt with separately, because that was sort of a collective failure of every government in the United States, right? Pretty much. But the going forward piece of it, right? If we imagine a world where the trust fund is fully funded, you're still going to be incurring every year future expenses associated with the current employees. That contribution will be a lot less, but that contribution still needs to be made. And we should just talk about it, we don't have to deal with it tonight, whether from a discipline standpoint, putting it in the departments would keep the pressure on the department heads in terms of managing their own headcount.
So I don't think it will. And here's why I wouldn't do it that way, is that you can, it's not a question, if a department adds people, it's not because they're sloppier about staffing than a department that doesn't add people, or at least it shouldn't be. If we're adding people to a department, it should be because the town has determined that department needs to increase its staffing, and I would think the control for that would be at the personnel board. So it's not an issue of a sloppy department adds more people than they should, and a careful department doesn't. It's either we need people or we don't, and the personnel board should be providing a kind of a standard discipline across all the departments in order to approve something. If we didn't do it that way, and we said, well, okay, you're gonna hire somebody for $50,000, but it's actually you're gonna have to ask for $55,000. As a practical matter, we don't go to departments and say, okay, if you want to hire somebody, figure out how you're going to cut your budget. They just hire, police or fire. They just hire somebody and then say, well, our budget is this much now, and we wind up funding it anyway. So folding a $5,000 OPEB charge, which is not an operating budget, it's actually a reserve. They're not going to spend that. It's not in their operating budget to spend this year. It's actually a reserve contribution going into an account that they shouldn't be able to touch, embedding a bunch of those little reserve accounts in every department.
Well, there'd still be one account. There's just one trust fund, right? I mean, so
well, but
part of the cost of that employee, right? And I think the reality is the personnel board is a check, the warrant committee is a check, but you only have so much insight into the actual operations of the department, right? So police chief comes in, DPW head comes in, fire chief comes in, describes why they need a person, right? I think under almost any circumstances, any department head can make, a rational, non-laughable case for hiring somebody, right? You can probably always find something in a town as big as ours with as much to for that person to do, right? And you can evaluate it at a certain level, you can make trade-offs, but ultimately only the people who are actually on the ground know, we really need this person, or you know what, I could do this if instead of hiring this additional person, we're gonna have 5 people working a little more overtime, we'll cover it the same way. Or there's another way to do that, right? And that's where I think even the personnel board, warrant committee, selectmen, town meeting, we can't really evaluate how creative a department head might be if they are bearing the full cost. And again, in a perfectly functioning world, right? If we didn't have this OPEB deficit, you'd be making every year, just as you're making pension contributions every year, you'd be making contributions every year in respect of the future cost of their health benefits, right? And whatever that number is, calculated by the actuaries, whether it's $1,200 a head, $1,500, whatever the number is, you'd be making that, it would go into the trust fund, and then it would be paid out of the trust fund to pay the premiums on the insurance for your retired employees, right? We're not there. Right. But part of the full cost, and this is one of the things that I think the ALS committee properly identified, part of the full cost of any employee is those future promises that you're making to them to pay for their health care, 10, 20, or 30 years in the future.
I guess what I'm getting at is I don't know if a department wants to hire, somebody, let's say just it's a $50,000 salary. I don't see a $5,000 incremental charge on top of that as driving behavior. And then on top of that, from a budgeting standpoint, that $5,000 is not part of the budget that they get. It's actually $5,000 that goes into a reserve. So I'm not even sure if we're arguing, because I'm saying you put that all in the OPEB trust, you put that in the OPEB budget line. The way this would work, if you did it for every new hire, then what would be happening is we would be adding $5,000 for every new hire. What I haven't talked about is that over time, as retirees pass on, you're actually, if you look at how the analysis goes, every year we wind up actually, for what we contribute, we actually get more credit against our liability because the folks aren't actually tapping the benefits at the level the actuaries were projecting. So what would happen is we'd keep doing that, the OPEB contribution would go up, and at some point, we would be at a level where the reduction in the benefits due to the long-term retirees, that starts offsetting, and then you can throttle back that $5,000 number. It's just that because it's a long-term obligation, you're putting it into a reserve fund. I'm just saying I would keep that in the same bucket.
We're not disagreeing. It's just a matter of where within the budget that money is allocated. That's all. In other words, are you allocating the full cost of each employee to the personnel, or are you just allocating salary into the personnel budgets of each department? That's the only question. Bill, you have a comment?
So much faster view. So one of the things I'm concerned about OPEB is, and I've been worried about this for a while, is when we started doing analyses of what development at the hospital was going to cost and what the impact on the town would be. One of the elements, of course, was services, town services. The other one was education costs, student costs, and there's been several discussions as to what's the best way to calculate students. But I had gone back to some of the warrant committee people and suggested that they add OPEB costs into the impact of trying to determine what student costs are, how many new teachers will be required based on a certain population of students in the development, and they came up with a number. So I'm listening to your discussion about how you would appropriate this. Do we have a number that we've determined is the appropriate number to add to an employee, and does it matter where it goes? For example, if we were sitting down and saying we needed to hire 10 teachers or 20 teachers or whatever, can we pull that number out and assign it just to an education cost when we're doing a pro forma or a financial impact analysis of the hospital and the town, the redevelopment?
So the short answer to your question about a new employee, we pushed the actuaries last year for ALS to give us a number. They didn't like that because everybody's different and all that, but nonetheless, the number they came back with was $5,000 a year for each person. So the OPEB costs $5,000 a year per person, and right now we're putting money in, so each new hire represents a new OPEB obligation. So if you add $5,000 to what you're contributing right now, what we're contributing right now isn't what the GASB says we should contribute, so we're not going deeper in the hole, but we're not pulling out of it as fast as GASB said we should. But when you look at what the actuaries do, we're pulling out of it faster than the actuaries had projected. So that's the retirement of the long-term obligations with retirees that are no longer around. That all goes away.
Right. So I understand that. But what I'm trying to get to, for example, is if you had, for example, 140 students or whatever coming into whatever development, wherever it might be in town, and a calculation was made that that's going to require an additional, well, with 20 in a classroom or whatever, what's that, 70? 7 teachers, 6 teachers, 7 teachers or whatever, and you were trying to calculate the impact of this development in terms of cost to the town, you would add presumably $35,000 to the cost of whatever the per student cost was?
Yes, the reason I'm not sure how to answer that is we already know that the average cost per student doesn't quite cut it.
I'm putting that aside.
So there are some other estimating parameters, but I wouldn't, I don't think those parameters, I don't know whether they did or didn't account for OPEB.
Well, they did.
Those are kind of blended numbers.
I know that they did. What number they used, I'm not sure, but they did in fact. What I'm trying to get to though is, if it goes into a total bucket of OPEB costs and everything else, how do you assess the actual impact of a development of 147 students to the town if the OPEB numbers are buried in the, so I'm just.
So I'm saying, so my answer is, you have a financial policy that says every new hire, you increase your OPEB budget line by $5,000. Mike's point is, but when you do that, the fact that they were a new hire, say, in the school department, you don't get the fiscal visibility of that impact in the schools. And I'm saying, yeah, that's true, except that that's not money that's in the operating budget for the schools to spend anyway. So we could get ourselves balled up between having operating budgets that are the real money that people will spend, and then we have this other parameter similar to what we did with ALS, is we carried it and said, well, this is the money, but that wasn't part of the budget.
But you use the operating budget to determine what the cost impact is per student, isn't that how you determine?
But I'm saying that,
however you calculate it, you use the operating cost.
But that is not, what I'm saying is that's not money that goes into the school operating budget to spend.
No, but it is the cost of what they're spending, right? I mean,
It is.
They're not laying out the cash to somebody this year, but the cost of the services they're providing, that's part of the cost.
So-
right? And what's happened, the problem historically is that was a cost that was not paid for, right? I mean, the reason you're in the OPEB situation we're in is we made promises to employees about benefits. We did not fund them. And just like a pension, the way you're supposed to fund a pension is by paying in each year in respect of 1 year's payout in the future, and you pay less because of the time value of money and all the rest of it.
So the whole point of that modified framework that I think we're going to follow is that you roll the OPEB cost up to the top.
No,
this just comes off.
I understand it entirely. I'm saying but the reason we do that is a function of the errors that were made in the past and where we are. If we were actually going to reflect the cost of what each department was doing, that cost would be in each departmental budget. Because even though they're
not in the budget, that's what I'm saying. It's not money you spend.
No, but why is that? I don't understand why that's relevant. Right? I mean, if a department is racking up long-term expenses, right, that somebody else is paying for, why shouldn't that be reflected in the cost? Essentially, what you're doing is you're saying to the department, okay, your budget is $36 million, but you're really costing the town $38 million this year.
Yeah.
And we're going to take that $2 million you're costing the town based on the judgments and decisions you're making and putting it just someplace else, as opposed to putting it in your budget.
So that's what we're doing right now with water and sewer. There's a water and sewer budget, but then there's a calculation that comes out of accounting on what the transfer contribution from the water and sewer budget over to town income is to compensate for the benefits and the rents and things that the water and sewer departments pay for of town operations. And I'm saying that's a complicated, basically that's a process where you wait till the accountants tell you what the number is.
Right.
I'm saying for OPEB you can do that, but then do you do that for the rent on the third floor of the town hall and also carry that transfer payment over? Or, some of this starts to get really complicated when you're trying to get your arms around an operating budget. Mm-hmm. And then you have all these things that this is what it really costs, and then here's the transfers, and the transfers go over here. It's tough enough just trying to follow the budget when it's just the money that they're going to spend.
I understand that, but I just think it's imprecise as to the actual liabilities that are being incurred in respect of what the operations are of that department.
I mean, you'd be better off, if you really wanted to be accurate, you'd sit there and say, well, how many people are working for the school department, multiply it by 5,000, and that's the number you're looking for.
Yeah, although I think it would be less if you did that. And that's what you should do, right? And that would be the most accurate way to do it. But it would be less than 5,000, I think. Because I don't think the actuaries don't say we should be, do they say we should contribute $2 million a year? What do they say? 'Cause that would have, we have 400 employees, 5,000 each would be $2 million a year. So I think if you did it for all the employees, it would be less than 5,000 a head. I think the 5,000 is the incremental cost that they calculated for the ALS. I think if you actually put that into each budget line per head, if you took the total amount the actuaries are saying you should contribute each year, you divided it by the number of employees, and you allocated that to each budget, that would be the most accurate way to do it.
So my head is blowing up here, so fine, I understand.
Well, we can't afford that. We can't do that.
No,
That would be
what I'm saying is, I'd have to see what that looks like
Right.
as a practical means of accounting or reflecting in the budget. That, to me, sounds like a very complicated way to make the budget more complex and harder for people to understand.
Quick question,
than just
Christine.
carry it
So,
at the top. But
taxes that we pay, withholding taxes, social security taxes, is there a separate line item for that, or does that just come in the salary line in budgets?
No, it's in it's in one of the fixed expenses up top. It's in your Medicare federal mandates.
Okay, so that includes Social Security?
That includes, because we don't pay Social Security.
Ah, that's right. And what about like income tax withholding? Where does that come out of?
I think that's all out of your federal mandates.
That's all there, so that's all the income
there.
tax?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll confirm that with Georgia in the morning,
Yeah.
but I believe that's all out of that budget.
That seems very low. I mean, the personnel budget for the school department is like $27 million. It would seem like you'd be paying more than $500,000 in taxes.
Let me find out where we keep it.
What I suspect is that that's part of each departmental budget, right? Because that's part of the salary that's paid to employees, and then it gets paid
Yeah.
to withholding
Yes.
and all of that. And that's all I'm saying is you treat OPEB the same way.
Yeah, because the budgets are for each department of your gross salary.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, but again, that's a discussion for the future.
Have to see it.
Anything else?
So there's a couple other things you need to think about. The Personnel Board is making a recommendation of 2% for the cost of living and 2% for the merit. The warrant committee is going to want to know how the Board of Selectmen feel about that. There are 2 new positions that were presented to you by the Personnel Board and department heads. You need to vote on whether or not you're accepting those 2 new positions.
Are they in these budgets already?
They're already in there. One was the .6 position in the facilities department, and the other was the full-time position at the wastewater treatment plant.
The wastewater treatment plant we have to do, isn't that
Yeah.
a consent order?
It's a consent order.
The state?
I don't have a soapbox like Mike yet.
And as I recall it, based on the analysis of the .6 position, it's likely to save us money.
We think so, yes.
Over outlays. So, I mean,
Yeah.
Peter, Gus, I don't know what you think, but I think those are,
Yeah, I think
we
need
have to do the
them.
wastewater treatment.
Yep.
And what was the other one, Christine?
It was a .6 position in the facilities department.
Oh, yeah, I remember that, yeah. Those are both fine.
Yeah. So we need a motion on that, or just?
I think a motion that you're approving the 2 new positions that were recommended.
I move that we approve the two new positions, one full-time position for wastewater treatment and a .6 position for the facilities management.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. So on the cost of living and the merit increase, I think my take on this is, we have had a hard time holding on to people, and we've had a hard time hiring people. And so I don't know that this is the time to get stingy on either of those things. I know, Christine, you talked about, two changes coming in the future. One is the Personnel Board wants to do another
They want to do a department head classification
department
study.
classification study, and I noticed that's something that's on the agenda for the regional selectmen's meeting on Thursday as well. And you also talk about institute employment reviews.
Correct.
Right, and so I think kind of my view would be to stick with the recommendation on the COLA and the merit for this year, and then we'll kind of move into the new system next year and think about how that's
Yeah,
done
the
in
one thing I
future.
would like to know is the comparable information for the school side.
As to what they're giving for increases.
Yes.
I will put that request in for you.
I don't think they have that. I mean, they have a contract, right? I mean, they.
Well,
Most of their-
my point is.
I think you're talking about the non-union employees.
My point, I'm talking about everybody. Because if we have part of the town that's going at one rate and the other part of the town that's not, at the very least, we ought to be looking at that square with our eyes open.
Okay, I will ask.
So do you want to hold off to vote on that? We'll
Mhm.
hold off, okay. Think you can get us an answer by tomorrow night?
I can request it.
Okay.
The only other, in terms of, only because I have a meeting with the warrant committee this week, in terms of your economic vitality for the downtown, one of
Mhm.
your warrant articles, are you interested in putting 15,000 in there again for this year?
Yes.
All right.
Okay.
We like vital downtowns.
I want to spend 1,000 of it, but we'll get to that in a minute.
All right. And so I think we're going to think this over. We'll talk tomorrow night
Mhm.
about a final vote on this. I put on here the structure of budget articles just to talk about, because we will have to revise the warrant if there's going to be an override article, and whether anybody wanted a change from the approach last year. I thought the structure last year was understandable to people as to what was at issue, and I thought it worked fairly well overall. I don't know if anyone has a different view on that.
No, I thought it was good. We have talked about trying to portray the budget this way, but that's separate from what you're talking
Right.
about.
It's just, we'd have to
We
we'd have
need
to
the
vote
actual
to
budget,
reopen the
right.
warrant.
Yes.
To add an additional article, which we should probably do next week.
Yes.
If that's going to be on the table. We could always withdraw it and dismiss it if we're able to get everything under the, what did you talk about, getting the big elephants and the small elephants inside the tent? If we can get all the various sized elephants in the tent. Right.
In the warrant committee, they're not yet at a point where they're recommending, like last year, we had 3 pictures because there was balanced budget or non-override budget, warrant committee recommendation, and we knew what the schools were coming in with, so we were able to anticipate that. The warrant committee hasn't come out.
The warrant committee does not want to take any action on any budgets until the Board of Selectmen takes action on the budget.
Yeah. And the school budget number that's in here looks to me, it's like 4.7%?
I think this is 4.54.
4.54, okay. So that's, okay.
So I will talk to them this morning. If there was a reduction yesterday, I was not aware of it.
So the warrant committee wants us to decide what we think the town can afford by way of what's reasonable by way of an override, rather than the warrant committee making a recommendation that we would.
I don't think they've gotten to the point of the override. They don't want to approve any budgets until the Board of Selectmen approves a budget.
But I don't, but the whole point is, it's the warrant committee that's doing the budget analysis to decide whether the budget should be approved. So if we approve a budget, what does that mean?
Then it goes to the warrant committee and they decide if they agree or not.
Yes.
On what basis will we make that decision?
Our deep wisdom and understanding of what's in the best interest of the town.
Because if we can use this to get to a balanced, non-override budget, I'll be ready to approve it. But if there's anything other than that, I'm not sure on what basis we're making the decision, because we ought to hear something from the warrant committee about what they think is prudent for the town. We may disagree with them, but
I think they are looking to flip the order of analysis from what has been true in the past, right? I think what they are proposing adheres more closely to the budget process as outlined in the town charter than the process that has historically been used. Right, I mean, if you read the way the budget process works in the town charter, the selectmen, the school committee approve a budget. This is our budget. It's forwarded to the warrant committee, and the warrant committee analyzes the budget and says yes, no, what have you with respect to the budget. I think that is what the warrant committee is.
that's not the way we've done it, because it's a stupid way to do it. Because we're making decisions without the kind of in-depth analysis the warrant committee does.
Well, I think what they're probably saying to us implicitly is that you are responsible for these budgets.
I
and
really
you should
don't care
analyze your
about
own
the
budget
bureaucratic
before you do it.
views of some people that think this is how it's supposed to work. If we need to change our plans, let's change them to where the people whose job it is to analyze the budget, instead of sitting there on their tushes talking bureaucracy to us. They're the ones that analyze the budget. They can come in with a recommendation, we can approve it. Otherwise, this idea, oh no, you guys do the budgets, and then we come in and decide whether we like it or not, that is bureaucratic garbage. Change it if we need to, but don't hit us with bureaucracy.
Mike Pastore, if you're out there listening.
Hi, Mike.
I'll be shocked if you are, but if you are, there's.
It just makes no sense. Because if we're gonna do that, then our question is, what's our policy? Are we gonna go with no override, or what override do we want? We can do that. What's the number you want? And it's the number across the board. It's not the number for the town, and then the schools are on their own. We need to know the full picture, and we make a decision on where we want to come out.
Is that a question for us? Or
Yeah, well, I mean, if we're going to grab the tiller of the boat, okay, let's grab the tiller of the boat, but then we need to make a policy decision on what we're willing to approve for the overall budget. And the first question is, are we going to approve an override of even a dime? And if we are, what's that number?
Well, I mean, look, the reality is, the only thing that we control in the process, if we want to avoid an override, are the budgets.
Yeah, that doesn't work, because 75% of what is controllable is on the school side. So when we say all we control is 25%, that doesn't work.
Right, but
that's the point.
That's just the fact.
Well,
words,
we don't control it.
The only way we can assure, right, that there is no override to be voted upon is by cutting the budgets that are under our control, the budget proposal that was made at town meeting, low enough such that that number and the school number can fit under, we cannot tell the school committee.
That is an impossibility. Do you understand? What you're saying is we're responsible for 100%, we control 25%.
No, I'm again, I don't know what Pastore and the rest of his bureaucratic ship of fools is doing, but I'm just kidding, Mike. It's entirely,
See, this is what builds our viewership when we have meetings like this.
Right. No, I think in defense of their position, which I think I understand, they want to know if we're going to go with these budgets, which combined with the school committee budget would require an override, or are we going to cut our budgets further such that the money, the budget number that's before the school committee will all get under 2.5%, right? So we're not making a judgment about the school committee and their budget because we can't, right? We cannot do, there's nothing we can do to lower that proposal. The only thing we can do is break that proposal up between two different articles in the warrant, which is what I think we're going to do, right? So but we can't say, no, the school committee proposal is 3.5%, because that would be the easiest way to do it, right? Just take their, take the school committee at 3.85%. We don't, I don't think they're asking us to vote on this, they want us to vote on the school committee budget?
No.
Well, so,
just ours.
but for our purposes, so we're going to approve a town operating budget. I don't understand what basis we're going to approve it on.
Because that's the money we think is prudent to spend for the town.
Budget is sitting at 4.54%, and we say, well, we just have to figure out how to get the town budget all the way down to where that overage, the 4.54% on our side, we need to go to 0% on the town budget, and then there won't be an override. My point is, if you don't control the full budget, which we do not, you can't take on full responsibility for making sure the town doesn't have an override.
But I don't think they're asking us to do that.
So help me understand
I think what they're asking us to do is simpler in saying that this budget, these are the numbers that the Board of Selectmen are proposing for our budgets here. This is our budget for the year.
Yeah, they're saying you've looked at the highway budget and you are comfortable with that amount that Mo is putting forward, and you approve that.
Against what frame of reference to judge it? Do we think, if you're saying, well, gee, Mo's numbers were all pretty reasonably justified them, so let's approve it. Then collectively, we have whatever we have, and we're sitting back at a $1.2 million override. You have to have something that you can grab onto, and I'm okay if all we're doing is we're managing the 25% that's the town operating budget. I would then say, well, let's go through this drill that I've got that takes what the warrant committee's guidance was for the schools, figure out what that says we can have for the town, and approve that budget. And that would still, if the schools are 3%, that's still an override.
No, I don't think so.
I think so.
I mean, if they're at 3%,
it doesn't get you down. Well, I'll have to get with Christine because you've got new numbers. But the numbers of 2 weeks ago with the 1.2 million, even if you took it from the 4.54 down to 3, that only took care of like 400,000 of an $800,000 problem.
So if they were at 3, it would shave about $525,000 off. You'd be 130 short.
Well, so you're looking at new numbers. The numbers I looked at.
I'm just looking at each 1% increase in the school budget is like $350,000.
Yeah, but the gap that I had the last time we did this is they were 685 over, maintaining a balance between town and schools.
Well, on the 7129, right?
And actually, it's 75-25 because we took the water and sewer out. Yvonne helped and the accounting was better. So it's actually 75-25, pure town operating budget, pure school budget.
Yeah.
So that's my point is you can't have this one thing moving around and then try to manage it all with the 25% that's left over. We need somehow or another to put a stake in the ground for not because we have the authority to tell the schools what they can spend, but because we need to be able to define what the override amount for the schools is versus what the override amount, if any, for the town is. I don't know how to make a decision on the assumption that, well, we just have to have the town suck up whatever it takes to not have an override.
Oh, it's not what I don't think anyone's.
Well, that's good. I'm glad.
I don't think anyone's saying that. I think all the warrant committee wants to know is that these are the budgets that the selectmen are approving.
On what basis?
I guess on what basis? I mean, again, the standard is, this is what we think is prudent to spend, this is what we need to fund the services we should have, this is what it costs to run the government that we're responsible for in fiscal year 2020, this is
Okay.
the amount we think is
Okay,
appropriate.
so I think it's prudent to not abuse the taxpayers a second year in a row by requiring an override. So what should our budgets be?
If you think that is true, then our budget should cut $660,000 more out of it.
Out of which side?
The ones we control, if you think that's right.
No, it's the whole town. That's my point. When you say, well, we have to cut it out of the 25% we
I'm
can
not
control.
saying that. If you're going to put a stake in the ground and saying, and again, here's how you measure it. What is the most important thing? Right? What's the most important thing? If the most important thing is avoiding an override no matter what, then yes, that's what we have to do because that's all we can control. If the idea is the most important thing is that we present a budget to town meeting that does not require an override, recognizing the fact that we do not control 75% of the budget, if that's the most important thing, and that is the number one priority for the Board of Selectmen, then yes, that requires us to cut our budgets low enough to get it under the thing. If the most important thing
That's
is
the
not...
part where we're departing. You're basically saying, well, if that's what we think is most important, then we have to manage that problem with the 25% of the budget.
Yes, because that's what we can't. Well, then why don't we just manage it with an extra $5 million of state aid?
You understand what
That's
I'm
how we're going to
saying?
manage it. Christine, put $5 million more of state aid in the budget, we've solved the problem.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
I
The
do.
override is an override for the total town budget.
Of course.
And you're saying, but we only control 25% of it, so everything has to happen in this 25%.
No, you're not listening. If we decide the single most important thing is presenting a budget to town meeting that does not require an override, we cannot change the number that the school committee puts into the proposed budget. We can move it between articles. We control the warrant. We can move it between articles. Mark, I don't think we have any authority to just unilaterally change the school committee's proposal.
No, you're absolutely right, we don't.
Okay. And
But
so
when we decide what to
you
approve on a
don't-
town side
Yes and no,
budget.
but I mean, you could attempt to open up a dialogue with them and get everybody on the same.
Oh, sure, but let's forget that for a second, okay? Let's get back to, apart from the dialogue, all I'm
Right, so
saying
there's
is,
legally and practically. Legally, town meeting could vote down the bottom line of the school budget. Practically,
but all we're talking about now with budgets, as I understand what we're talking about, and Pete, tell me if you disagree or if we're wrong, is what is the number that's going to go in the warrant for the proposed budget? And the rubric we have to use depends on what's most important. If what is most important is that at all costs, regardless of what anybody else does, that we are, as the Board of Selectmen, are committed to submitting a budget to town meeting that will not require an override if the proposed budget is submitted. The only arrow we have in our quiver is to change the budget numbers under the budgets that we control. We cannot change that school number. If we decide that while we would like to avoid an override, and the official position we will take on the school budget is that the town meeting ought to vote it down and vote a lower number that the warrant committee will propose or something else, we can take that position, but going into town meeting, it leaves open the possibility that, as last year, that recommendation will be voted down and there will be a budget approved that requires an override. And so I think, from my perspective, while I would very much like to avoid an override, I don't think that the budgets that we have could withstand $660,000 in cuts without significantly reducing the services that are provided
Let me
to the
try
town.
this a different way. We just agreed that we wanted to portray the budget information the way we did last year. The first picture of the budget last year was the no override budget. What numbers are we going to put in? And let's for a second here assume that the school department sticks with its 4.54% increase. What numbers do we plan to put in for the town department in that no override baseline?
I'm happy to use the numbers that your, pinball formula would give us for that.
Well, right now, my pinball formula may be only $600,000 gap, but I had it as a week or two ago, 1.2 million.
Right, but I mean, you can tweak the baseline there to say we're only going to increase it the total amount that we have, allocate it between the two sides. We know what those numbers are on their side. Here's the number on their side. And then we pull the smaller elephants out of our tent and we put them in the override tent and they pull some in there and that's what's there. Right? I mean, I think if we're going to start from that framework of, all right, no override, here's the total amount we have to work with. Again, whether it's 75-25, 74-26, whatever we can use that rubric to get to that allocation.
Okay. So
You disagree with that?
No, well, let's try that. Tomorrow night's enough time for us to pick this back up. So Christine, I'm going to come see you guys tomorrow to
Looking
update
forward to
this sheet, which perhaps we go from 1.2 to 600K or something like that. That 600K is going to distribute, if we really are there, that 600K is going to distribute between the school side and the town side. There's going to be a number on the town side that's what we're over, and that's the amount that we have to cut by. Over and above what you've already cut.
Over and above what I've got.
In the balanced budget, the no override presentation, we could take the position that, well, that's the no override number, that's the default. We think that the services that would have to be cut to get to that number are too draconian, and there people count on them, and so we are going to support these additional budgets in this, whatever it will be, Article 29 or 31, if how many we have this year. It's fewer than last year. Last year was 40. Last year was 45.
About 32, I think.
Yeah, and we just lost the OPEB, so we're down to 31.
Or Gus, I mean, to that point, we could say that, the most important thing is avoiding an override, but we ought to then, and again, I don't agree with this, but you could say, you know what, the most important thing is avoiding an override. That's more important than sticking with our capital fiscal reserves policy. And so we're going to go below the free cash number that we've proposed and split the difference. We'll use more free cash because avoiding an override in 2019 is more important than sticking with the policy on future capital reserves.
We agreed somewhere between 200,000 and 500,000 is something that we would be willing to make that compromise on for this fiscal year in order to close the gap, but we're still not even.
We're not
there.
even in that range. So
I think what I'm really getting at is that I would like some clear delineation when we have, because we have two sides to the budget. The idea that, well, if we have an override overall, then we have to figure out a way to take it out of the town, is the thing that's strangling the town. And so what I'm really looking for is two separate index lines that say, this override is for the schools, this override is for the town. Because last year, when the override, which was fundamentally the override for the schools, was passed, the argument was made, if you pass this year, we shouldn't need an override for the next couple of years. And here we are talking about an override, and we're talking about a 4.54% budget on the school side. Might be all sorts of good rationales, but that is not what was committed.
But they didn't commit to
when that
it.
number was put out there.
They didn't commit to it.
It was absolutely
We didn't agree.
committed.
You said
No,
4%
no,
was too.
no, I'm not talking about the memo. I'm talking about how that 6% override was sold to the taxpayers last year. It was sold that if we get this override this year, we should not need it. Read the patch article from Tim Bonfatti.
Oh, I'm not.
It's in writing.
I'm not disagreeing with that.
So that was the commitment. It has nothing to do with the memo that we didn't sign that permanently embedded that the schools would grow at 4% and the town would grow at 2%. It's nothing to do with that. That did not get signed, and that's why that did not get signed. I'm talking about what was represented to the taxpayers going into the town meeting. And yet, here we are, talking about a 4.54% increase, and how we're going to absorb it on the town side.
Right, but that is not a representation anybody in this room made, and so I don't think there's any reason for us to argue about it, because we didn't make that representation, and it's not, all I'm saying is, there's no, as with any other legislative judgment made by any legislative body, there is no mechanical formula that tells you what the answer is. If there were, you wouldn't need legislation, you wouldn't need town meeting, you just have a formula and you get the answer. So we're not going to have a formula that's going to give us an answer. We have to decide what is the priority in the budget this year. If the priority is avoiding an override, then that's what we're going to work on, and we only can work on it on our side. If that's important but not essential, then we're going to come in somewhere in the middle. And to me.
So in fairness, where I went off on the bureaucratic stuff, is in the past, the warrant committee acting on behalf of the taxpayers and looking in depth at the budgets, there were years when the warrant committee would say, we think, taxpayers, you should look at an override. Here's what's driving the problem we have in the budget, and we believe this year we recommend you accept an override. Now, they didn't do that last year, but we did it several years ago.
Well, they did do it last year. There just was a smaller override than the one that went ahead.
Well, actually, you're right. They did.
They said $1 million override.
Year.
They were good.
So what's bothering me this year is if the warrant committee said, well, we don't want to do that. We want you to tell us what the number needs to be. I'm saying, I don't know. The basis of the warrant committee doing that in the past was the warrant committee looking at the budgets, making a good faith judgment about what was reasonable, and then making a recommendation on what they thought the taxpayers should agree to afford. Now they're saying, well, we want you guys to do that. And I'm saying, on what basis?
Well,
Because the
again-
basis the warrant committee did was looking at the budgets, understanding the budgets, and trying to be as conscientious as possible and meet
Now,
both those needs.
I'm sure Pastore wasn't watching, because if he was, he would have come down here by now to defend himself. And so since he's not, we'll see if maybe we can get him to come tomorrow night and explain himself. I will suggest, however, though, that the way the warrant committee has done it in the past didn't work the last two town meetings, right? So if you look at the contested issues in the 2017 town meeting, the 2018 town meeting, where the warrant committee disagreed with other bodies in the town. In 2017, it was mostly us. 2018, last year, it was mostly the school committee. The warrant committee pretty consistently position was voted down by the town meeting. And so it does not surprise me in light of that, and I've had that the warrant committee might be looking at changing its overall approach if they think there's an answer that they should try to get to persuade the town to, and this may well be part of changing that approach, looking at going into a town meeting, taking a different approach than the one that was unsuccessful last year and unsuccessful in 2017. That's all. Now, again, that could be completely wrong. It could be purely bureaucracy. It could be spite at us, whatever it is. But all I'm saying is it's not surprising to me that as the warrant committee is looking the way it's conducted business and the way it's done things, that they may be looking to adjust it in light of the way things happened over the last 2 years. We should hear from them, and I think for us, we have to decide, I think, what our priority is in proposing these budgets that we control.
So my issue is, I don't know what the basis of that will be, but I am open to us discussing what the basis is that we want to make that determination. I just haven't got a clue. But I'm open to what we're thinking.
Okay. Pete? Anything?
You know, my position on the budgets is, I look at the budgets that get presented to us and the changes that are made year to year, and make decisions about what seems reasonable there. I don't analyze the budgets in terms of how they should get cut to try to get to specific goals. I guess I would leave that in. Historically, we've left that to the warrant committee and the town administrator to do, so I guess I would continue to rely on them to get that information to us.
Okay. All right, anything else we need to talk about on the financial side, Christine?
No, I think we can hold everything else.
Covered that? Okay.
Cover everything
Consent agenda. Anyone have any objections to items on the consent agenda?
Nope.
We have a motion.
I move that we approve the items on the consent agenda.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Yep.
All right. Christine, you wanted to defer town administrator goals till tomorrow?
If I could, and I just wanted to, I apologize, I didn't send these out in advance, but I just want to take the opportunity to thank everybody for being patient with us for the last 2 weeks. With Mike's passing, things came to a very quick grinding halt at the town hall. So I just want to thank the warrant committee, the board of selectmen, all the residents for their patience while we dealt with that. I appreciate it.
Okay. Is there any further town administrator update?
I have two things quickly. One is, I'm not sure if you're aware, but we don't have an AED at the town hall. It's been an issue for several years for me that we don't have one. Recently, the library has been able to acquire one through an Eagle Scout who is doing a project. I've been working with the fire chief, and we have actually purchased one, and I would like to pay for it. It's a little over $1,000 using our economic vitality of the downtown. I think it's something that we need to have at the town hall. We're open to the public. It's expected now in public buildings, and I would like to expend that money.
So this has nothing to do with the heightened emotional vitriol of the Board of Selectmen's meetings.
I was wondering if it was charged this evening. It will be installed next week, so everybody hang in there. So if it's okay with you, we will pay for that out of that fund. And your current balance in that fund is about $19,000.
Okay. I move that it's $1,000. Christine, $1,000.
I think it's $1,100, something like that. So if you could do $1,100.
I move that we approve expenditure of $1,100 or approximately $1,100 from the Downtown Economic Vitality Fund for the purchase of an AED for the town hall.
Second.
All of our public buildings will have at least one AED available.
All in favor? Aye.
Yep.
All right.
Is it the same one as the library will have?
Yes.
It's the same,
We coordinated so that maintenance on them would be done by the fire department.
Yeah.
And you have an item on here for town hall hours.
For town hall hours, there's actually two parts of this because I have proposed cutting the evening meetings, the evening we're open. I'd love to coordinate all my evenings, but no. Town administrator budget, we would cut the town hall hours from 37.5 to 34.5, which is a $26,000 budget cut. However, I don't think that is something we would like to do. It's not something I want to do. I don't want to restrict further access to the town hall, but I would like to, if you don't take that budget cut, I would like to move the late night from Thursday nights to Tuesday nights. I think it's important when people come to the Board of Selectmen's meeting, they come to a lit building, that they're able to do business. The four of you can do business when you come to the Board of Selectmen's meeting. I think it's nice for the Board of Selectmen and the people coming to the meetings to see the staff, interact with the staff that are in the building. It would be nice for the staff to be here to support those of us who are at the meeting to do that kind of work. In terms of summertime, first Thursdays is very crowded. Parking is at a premium. Closing the town hall at 4:30 on Thursdays would free up 16 parking spots for the first Thursday events in the downtown. So I think it makes more sense for us to be open on Tuesday evenings rather than Thursday evenings.
When would you propose to institute the change?
We're looking at going, originally I had thought beginning of April. I think we would start after town meeting at this point.
Okay,
But
all right. And obviously, to the extent you need to give some flexibility to any employees who have to make childcare arrangements or otherwise that are predicated on being late on Thursdays versus Tuesdays, obviously, that's within your discretion, and you can figure. I think it's a good idea. We should make sure we publicize it on the website that beginning thus and such
that's
a
why
date.
I'd like to take some time to institute it to get people.
Yeah, and I think it probably is better for a lot of people just in that, Thursday nights sometimes become an extension of the weekend. There's more events. People might go away. I think Thursday night might be a busier night than Tuesday nights.
I agree.
Just on balance for folks, and so this way it's a bigger benefit to them, and I think it's a good idea.
I like it too.
Okay.
Definitely
So I will
objection?
talk to the rest of the staff. I actually have a department head meeting tomorrow. We'll come up with a date to fully
Okay,
implement it.
great. Selectmen reports. Pete.
Just went to the Townwide Master Planning Committee training session before this meeting, and I am reporting that they have pizza, so I like their meetings better.
I should have volunteered for that one, Pete. Jeez.
That's it.
All right, Gus?
I don't think I have any reports. I was out of town 2 weeks ago. My backwards memory is always limited, but I don't think I've been to anything in the last couple of weeks, so no report.
I will entertain a motion to adjourn unless there's any objections for my report. Tom, you have a comment?
Yes.
I know you got to have a microphone.
Okay.
Thank you.
In due respect for Mike, may I recommend that we take his extension 3010 and retire it forever.
We did.
You did?
We did.
Thank you very, very much. And thank you, Mike. He was great. Thank you, thank you.
Quick question, have we heard back from those two people, the two guys that made the presentation about a possible event out here involving
I'm working with them.
Did you notice that's an issue, these tent pop-up open-air bars are an issue in Boston as well. It was in the Globe at least twice in a series of articles.
All righty then. Now do we have a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.